Hi, Dana. Okay, Zeke.
Yes, sir. We are live, rolling, and streaming.
Good evening. This is the regular meeting of the City of Morro Bay City Council. It is Tuesday, May 26th. It's 5:30 p.m. This meeting is being held via teleconference, and I'll ask the clerk to establish a quorum of council members, please.
Yes, thank you. Councilmember Addis. Councilmember Addis. Councilmember Davis.
Yes, I'm here.
Councilmember Heller.
Here.
Councilmember McPherson.
Yes, I'm here.
And Mayor Heading.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. We do have a quorum. I will call the meeting to order and ask that in honor of Memorial Day and those that have served this country, that we take this moment of silence. Thank you. And Councilmember Heller, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for that. Very much appreciated. With that, I'll ask our city attorney, do we have a closed session report, Chris? Mr. City Attorney, are you on the line?
Yes. Good evening, Mayor. No closed session items to report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And then that'll take us to mayor and council members' reports, announcements, and presentations. I'll start by just sharing, for those of you that don't keep track of COVID-19 related issues, I don't know how many of you out there that don't, but give you some of the current information. This is as of 5:25 at 1400 hours. Compared to 1 week ago, I'll share data with you. The cases in San Luis Obispo County on 5/25 were 259. That is up from 246 1 week ago on 5/18. We still had, fortunately, only one death in the county. Majority of cases continue to be in the age range of 18 to 64. The vast majority of cases, that is. The majority of cases occur in North County. There were 153 a week ago. This week, as of the 25th, there were 165. Primarily an increase in Paso Robles with an increase from 97 to 107 cases. Morro Bay remains at 6 cases and has been at 6 cases for the last 5.5 weeks. The other communities have remained stable from 1 week ago. I will tell you that the majority of means of transmission have been community transmission and person to person. That was the same a week ago. The surrounding counties continue to increase at a greater rate than San Luis Obispo County. Our increase over the last week remains in single digits, and a majority of the other counties, percentage-wise, have increased in double-digit range. For your information, Kings County had an increase from 399 to 647 cases. Kern County, 1,537 to 1,871 cases. Santa Barbara also had a slight increase from 1,496 to 1,551 cases. Fresno County, 1,263 a week ago, 1,482 on the 25th. And Tulare County, 1,436 cases a week ago, and 1,641 cases this past May 25th. In San Luis Obispo County, the vast majority of cases are recovered cases. Last week, there were 207 recovered cases. This week, 234. Last week, we had 2 patients hospitalized. This week, we had 3 patients, hospitalized. 2 in ICU last week and 2 in ICU this week. And as I mentioned previously, we remain at 1 death, and that was early on in the reporting. As you know, the state mandated that all communities submit through their public health department, not communities, but counties through their public health department, an attestation indicating that they met the state's criteria to move to the next level with regard to movement forward for reopening. San Luis Obispo did that last week. That was their second submission after the first was rejected. The second was approved. And as a result of that, we were able to move into the second phase of the state's phase 2 for reopening. As of April 20th, elective surgeries, dog grooming, sport fishing, and construction have reopened. As of April 22nd, janitorial and housekeeping services, retail stores that sell fabrics, and drive-in theaters were allowed to operate within public health guidelines. On the 8th of May, retail curbside sales were allowed and expected to open. And most recently, as you know, retail stores have opened as well as restaurants with guidance given by the public health department, maintaining social distancing and other sanitation requirements that are quite extensive that have to be met and certified. In addition to that, the county has limited occupancy of hotels, motels, vacation rentals to 50% or less, and that order continues in the county. Most recently, houses of worship were allowed to reopen to a maximum capacity of 100 individuals and with the required social distancing. And we'll be hearing more via a public health announcement probably tomorrow with regard to that. With that, that ends my report, and I'll move to Councilmember McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to let folks know, if they're wondering what that large boat is that's going in and out of the harbor, it's dredging our harbor, and that is the Yaquina, and it comes every year. And I want to really give a shout out to the mayor and Eric for once again getting us the federal dollars from the Army Corps of Engineers to dredge our harbor, $2.75 million this year, and there's money in the budget for next year. And it's really a very important project. They arrived here on May 10th, and they will be here through June 2nd. So thank you for doing that, and it's good to see them. And by the way, they take out 8,000 to 10,000 cubic yards of dirt, silt, sand in a 24-hour period. So that gives you an idea of how our harbor fills up. So that's my announcement.
Thank you for that, and thank you for that recognition. It wouldn't be without the help of Congressman Carbajal, who's advocated also for those dollars for Morro Bay consistently. We appreciate his help as well. Councilmember Heller, announcement, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have any official announcements, but I just hope that everybody has been enjoying the weather and that you're all taking care of your stress, whether you know it or not. We're all under a certain amount of stress because of what's going on. And just want to encourage everyone to take care of yourselves and try and keep a positive attitude, which I'm working on as well. And it's been beautiful, Morro Bay, the last few days. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. And Councilmember Addis, please.
Yes, I have two announcements. One is that tomorrow at 5 o'clock at womensmarchslow.com, we'll be interviewing our very own Chamber Director, Erica Crawford, to talk about what happens now that we are deeper into stage 2 of the resiliency roadmap. And she has both the Morro Bay perspective as well as a regional perspective to be able to talk about what businesses are doing to make sure that we're healthy and safe, and that once open, we can stay open. So the public is invited to attend at womensmarchslow.com. And then also, with all of the feedback from so many people in Morro Bay and across Slow County through Women's March, we have decided to start a campaign. It's #WearAMaskSlowCounty. And I believe our very own mayor and council member McPherson have joined that campaign. So I want to say thank you. It's basically a grassroots campaign to encourage people to use a mask properly when social distancing is not possible. So we know there's many situations in which you don't need to wear a mask or you shouldn't wear a mask. We're not saying to wear a mask all the time, but we do invite the public to join #WearAMaskSlowCounty that is advocating for the proper use of wearing masks or face coverings when social distancing is not popular. And you can also join us there at Women's March Slow or on Facebook at Women's March Slow. So I look forward to seeing people also tomorrow night at 5 o'clock to hear from our chamber director, and hope to see your photos online being the example of proper mask wear when social distancing is not possible.
Great. Thank you for those announcements. Very much appreciated. And Councilmember Davis.
Yes. Last Friday, San Luis Obispo City Council implemented an open slow program that includes temporary strategies to use public spaces and city rights of way to facilitate physical distancing and to support economic recovery. I spoke to Mayor Harmon over the weekend about the program and got some additional information from her. Right now, they are assessing some temporary measures for things like closed streets, parklets, and using surfaced parking lots. I also got to talk to Erica Crawford of our chamber on Friday, and she told me that Eric Justison of RRM Design Group has offered his firm's assistance at no cost if we want to take a similar look here in Morro Bay. This is something that I think could really help to provide creative opportunities for our restaurants and our retail businesses as we try to recover. And so when we get to future agenda items tonight, I would like to bring this up. And I have a second item. I have an appointment tomorrow afternoon to get a haircut. So that's it for me.
How did you get an appointment so quickly? That's wow. Well, thank you for that, Councilmember Davis. And with that, I'll turn to Mr. Collins, our city manager. And let me just preface this by saying, Scott, I want to thank you, Ms. Calloway, Chief Cox, Chief Knuckles, and Harbor Master Endersby, and the maintenance staff this weekend. We were inundated with folks, and your staff has done a tremendous job in making sure that there was as much compliance as possible with social distancing and being present in the community and taking care of trash issues, et cetera. So thank you so much to you and your staff. And I'll let you give a further report on this weekend and any other things. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor, council members, and community members. Thanks for joining us tonight. Before we get to the weekend of last weekend and looking forward, just want to make the community aware that the City Council will be hosting their first review of the draft fiscal year 2020-2021 budget on June 3rd, which is next Wednesday at 3 p.m. It will be a Zoom meeting, much like this one. So just want to make folks aware. And also want to note that the city manager's ad hoc committee that is reviewing our local relief and recovery from COVID-19 on the financial front is completing their work, and we'll be submitting a report to myself and City Council this week, most likely. And I really want to thank them for their great efforts that they've been able to pull together in the last few weeks. And as the mayor mentioned, we did have a very, very busy weekend here on the annual kickoff to summer, though this will be a summer like no other, of course, given that we are still living with the pandemic. I want to thank the community for staying safe and doing the right things, that being our community members, and also being patient with the significant number of visitors who came here when they shouldn't have. We are still in a pandemic. Yes, we have good numbers, and relatively speaking, the counties around us also have good numbers compared to the rest of the country. Nonetheless, we still have a pandemic we're trying to beat back. And we have made strides, and we are in the process of reopening, and we don't want to go back. We go back when our numbers get bad. That means people are getting sick, which is a bad thing. So we're all in this together to try to figure it out. So I want to extend my gratitude and thanks to the patience of our community members having to endure this. The county is enforcing the local order on hotel and vacation rental occupancy at 50%, RV camps as well. So they're following up on that. We increased our signage around town. We had extra police and harbor patrols. We had the added support of our lifeguards out on the beaches. We actually had volunteers assisting us through traffic management and trash pickup. We had extra porta potty service, in and around our more trafficked areas. And some folks on our staff say it was probably the busiest Sunday they've seen in recent memory. While the state is slowly reopening, it's important that we maintain our due diligence. That's all of us. Community members have done a tremendous job. Our business community has done a tremendous job. And I know they will continue to do that by following the plans, adhering to those plans established by the state, as the mayor alluded to, with stringent sanitation requirements, occupancy levels, making sure they've gone through training with their staff and have self-certified, and members of the public have access to that certification. Community members are continuing to do a good job, which I know they have done and will continue to do. And we will be educating our visitors who shouldn't be here. We will be educating them and continue to do that, and enforcing where we're not getting compliance. And I want to thank the police department, our fire chief who is out there, harbor folks who are out there, volunteers who are helping us with compliance, and trying to get the best out of this as we can, knowing that not everybody's following the rules. And we'll do our best to address that. We have a very low rate of COVID, and we want to keep that way here. And thank you for reporting issues, community members, because you're extra eyes for us in the community. We can't see everything at all times. We have a limited number of staff, so your support and efforts are really helpful in us maintaining that low rate of COVID here. So at this time, as the mayor alluded to, in-store retail, in dining for restaurants is now allowed. Houses of worship are now allowed to be open in SLO County, as are hair salon and barbershops, which was just issued earlier this afternoon. So with that, I conclude my report and can answer any questions you have. I also have fire chief, planning director, finance director, looks like harbor master as well, and police chief here can answer any questions about this weekend behind us and the ones coming forward.
Thank you, Scott. Council members, any questions of staff regarding the city manager report?
I have one, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
I would like to thank Jennifer Calloway for giving me the opportunity to pick up trash this weekend and at the Rock parking lot, which I must say was a remarkably satisfying experience. And they actually had some kids, some 10, 11, 12-year-old kids come up and genuinely want to help. So I'll be out there next weekend with some kids picking up trash too. So I'm surprised how much I liked it. So Ms. Calloway, thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Any comments or other questions? Seeing or hearing none, I'll go ahead and move us forward on the agenda. With that, I'll open up public comment. Our clerk is going to put the link to the Zoom webinar on the screen. If you'd like to connect via Zoom, the link is there. And also the telephone number for telephone attendees. That number is there for you as well. Please remember, just because you connect doesn't mean you get to speak, you have to raise your hand. So I just want to point out right there in the middle where it's that yellow 2 words are outlined, raise hand if you do desire to speak. With that, Zeke from AGP, sir, thank you. I'll open up public comment. This is for public comment for items that are on the agenda for which you can't stay and you'd like to speak to now, or items that are not on the agenda that you wish to address. And go ahead, Zeke.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, our first speaker is John Wise. Go ahead, John.
Welcome, John.
Thank you. It took me a moment to unmute. Citizens, Honorable Mayor, Council, staff, my name is John Weiss. And for general public comment, I'd like to address what I believe is a minority view, but still important, I think, to address. I plan to speak at the specific agenda items later, so my comments are general, but I feel important. That is the belief that any person who is considering running for office should not use public comments to say anything. I would hope that my comments are constructive and well received and considered regardless of my possible political plans. The city is divided, and I hope we can all come together to solve problems and not feel gotcha is in our vocabulary. Let's all work together, even if we differ in our thinking. And while I have not been named, others have, who have no plans to run for any office and have been attacked by name on social media. My hope is that all comments are constructive and worded to articulate a particular position, whether the council agrees or not, and are welcome. With that, I hope this is a productive meeting and that the council and staff, as you normally do, will consider all input and weigh with your own belief what is best for Morro Bay and act accordingly. I also want to comment on Councilman Addis. I do wear a mask when social distancing is not possible in public places. I have it in my car. I have hand sanitizer. I do support the initiative personally, which is a personal view. I know there are those who disagree. And I hope you have a great meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Well stated. Appreciate that. And Zeke, go ahead with our next public comment caller.
Next speaker, Carol Truesdale.
Welcome, Carol.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the staff, but I want to put a shout out to Councilman Jeff Keller for putting on the gloves and glasses and masks and cleaning up part of the Embarcadero. That's number one. Number two, I really appreciate the fact that Don Addis is supporting the wear the mask when in public. I'm one of the seniors out there, so I do it for you. Please do it for me. And number three, I want to thank everyone who has been supportive of the opening of our city. And I'm part of the community center here, and we're doing a review of how we can come out positively out of this. So those are my positive statements. Now, my statements of concern are the fact that why should the citizens have to pay on the work for the red-legged frog and the delays? I don't think that 12% increase should be our journey. I would really think that the council will take a look at that and ask the management company to really review that, and under the circumstances where our city is financially, et cetera, take a good view of that, and in all good kindness, take that back. That $2.2 million is a really hit to our budget. Anyway, thank you, everybody, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Carol. Appreciate you. Go ahead, Zeke. Next public comment.
All right. Kurt.
Welcome, Kurt.
This is a Chris Rodebush.
Oh.
Is that
Chris? Welcome.
Hi, greetings. Greetings from the We Are the Care initiative. Now more than ever, we are reminded that access to quality and affordable care is vital for our community to function and support our economy. We can clearly see that childcare professionals are now and always have been an essential part of our workforce. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted and forever changed the life of every member in our community. Parents are no longer working under normal circumstances, if at all, and children are no longer attending schools or childcare centers in the traditional manner. We do not know for certain when our lives will return to normal, but we hold on to the knowledge that someday we will go back to work and the children will go back to school. But according to a recent study by the National Association for Education of Young Children and the Center for American Progress, almost half of licensed child care centers and family child care homes are at risk of closing due to COVID-19. This will throw an already in crisis child care system into utter chaos. In order for our economy to get back on its feet, we need child care providers. If we do not support the private sector of child care, many families will be unable to work when the time comes. This is where we ask you, our community leaders, to act now to support child care and early childhood professionals. Private centers and family child care homes who already operate on razor-thin margins are at a loss for how they can afford to expend their already limited resources to implement required and necessary changes to ensure the health and safety of our children, families, and staff. Additionally, current limitations on group sizes equate to significant reduction in number of children served, and therefore solvency of programs. We need your help to think creatively on ways to ensure that our local mixed delivery childcare system survives this crisis. The same centers that are currently open and serving the families of essential workers, putting their staff at risk to support the community, are the very same programs that may have to close their doors. We are also asking you to go one step further in supporting the early childhood and child care and appoint a member of this council or staff as a child care liaison. Your child care liaison will be our first point of contact, and we hope to build a relationship with that individual so that together we can make great changes for the family and workforce of the Morro Bay community. We thank you for your support in our first year as an initiative and hope you continue to support us as we work together to solve the child care crisis. If you would like to learn more about the We Are the Care initiative or to get involved, please contact First 5 San Luis Obispo County or find more information on our website at www.first5slo.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris, for calling in. Zeke, next public comment, please.
It's going to be 8:05.
Yes, sir. Next caller, go ahead and unmute, please. There you go. There you go, caller. You're on live.
Public comment is open. Are you there?
Next caller in line. Are you there? They're on a phone line. Okay.
Okay.
It looks like they need to unmute on their
Yeah, they
end.
need to unmute. Yeah, I can't unmute them. They need to unmute themselves.
Folks, if you're in line for public comment, you need to unmute your mute button in order to speak.
Well,
take the next caller and
okay,
hopefully we'll get back in the queue.
Okay, go ahead. Next caller. Can you hear us? You are live online. Okay. There you go. And who is
Hello?
it? Hello,
Welcome.
next caller.
Can you hear me?
Hi, now I can.
Okay.
Hi, I just want to ask you a question, Mayor Heading. I don't understand why we're pushing a project of this magnitude, talking about the WRF, especially now that we're already heavily in debt. And you spent $19 million of the city's own money to get started because you didn't want to wait, I guess, until November. But who is supposed to be noticing businesses? And the people that you hired, the workers, how many are local hires? This little town has been put out of business for quite a while. And I don't understand why we're spending money we don't have. How are our residents supposed to keep up with these bills? This is an out of control vanity sewer that none of us can afford. And thanks to the influx of tourists that was so badly managed by the council and the mayor, we'll be lucky if our numbers don't climb. The counties around us came here because they knew they could get away with it. It's nice to share our town with others, but to buck a pandemic, not so nice. It almost seems like you don't care. It almost seems like you don't have the city or this project under control. And yeah, Dawn, I appreciate that. I wish we had gotten that little thing going with the mask before Memorial Day. And Scott, I don't appreciate you telling us to still do our job staying safe when we have. The city dropped the ball on this. The visitors have come and gone, and I want to know how many tickets were written. Thank you.
Thank you. Zeke, next caller, please.
Okay, we're going to try the previous caller. And caller, you're online. Hello?
Hello, Mr. Mayor. This is Dan Sedley from Morro Bay.
Welcome, Dan.
I too wanted to thank Mr. Heller for his actions of directing traffic and picking up trash over this 3-day weekend. Truly, Mr. Heller has proven that he is not just a speaker in behalf of our city, but actually works on behalf of our city, and his example is well noticed, observed, and appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Heller. Secondly, I would like to read a letter from Jordan Cunningham. It states, friends, last week my colleagues and I sent a letter to the governor imploring him to include salons and barbershops in the statewide Stage 2 reopening. According to John Hopkins' public health principles for phased reopening during COVID-19, guidance to governors, business and personal care sector have low to medium contact intensity and number of contacts, as well as higher ability to modify operations. We've heard from hundreds of stylists, barbers, and shop owners from throughout the Central Coast looking for help with EDD and guidance on when they would be allowed to reopen. I'm happy to say the governor heard us, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. Salons and barbershops will reopen in a matter of days if they are able to follow these guidelines. This is a huge win for the Central Coast. I want to thank Jordan Cunningham for his active lobbying on behalf of the San Luis Obispo County and helping us to reopen against the slow reopening that has been previously happening. He has helped us to reopen at a faster rate. Lastly, on social media, I too have been demeaned for my opinions. I am not at this point a contender for city council, and I reserve the right to express my First Amendment opinions. I do so civilly. I don't expect to be demeaned in any forum or format. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all I have.
Thank you, Dan. Zeke, next caller, please.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, we have nobody else in the queue.
Okay. Thank you. With that, I will close. Pardon me. I will close public comment and bring it back. Let me just see. I believe we'll be addressing all of the questions regarding the WRF during that agenda item, so I'll withhold any comments until then. And let's see. Other than that, I don't really have anything that looks like it needs to be addressed at this time that won't be covered during the agenda. So thank you for that. Yes.
Chris Rodebush talked about having a liaison for childcare, and I wonder if perhaps Councilmember Addis would be willing to volunteer to do something like that.
What I was hoping for would be consideration during a future agenda item to appoint such a liaison.
All right, that's great.
Would that be okay? Thank you. All right. Okay, with that, we are back, and we are moving to the consent agenda, item A on the agenda. We have 4 items on the agenda, and I will go ahead and open up public comment for items on the consent agenda. So Zeke, if we have anybody that's calling in or on the web for public comment on the consent agenda, we'll take those calls now.
No, sir. We have nobody with their hands raised at this time.
Thank you. Having no public comment on consent agenda, I'll bring it back to council and entertain a motion for approval.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. Motion by Councilmember McPherson to approve items A1 through A4. Second by Councilmember Addis, I think I heard. And with that, any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember McPherson.
Yes.
Councilmember Addis.
Yes.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes.
Councilmember Heller.
Yes.
And Mayor Heading.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. That brings us to item B, public hearing. This is item B1 that was placed on the agenda in anticipation of having further information available that is not available. With that, I will make a motion to table item B1 to a future date uncertain.
I'll second that.
So motion by Mayor Heading to table item B1, second by Councilmember Addis. Any discussion? Not, roll call vote, please.
Mayor Heading.
Yes.
Councilmember Addis.
Yes.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes.
Councilmember Heller.
Yes.
And Councilmember McPherson.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. That moves us to item C, business items, C1, review and approve potential change orders for the Water Reclamation Facility, WRF, review and receive the WRF Capital Project quarterly update report, and review and approve proposed good faith local hire provisions for bid documents for the remaining WRF project components, including an amount for liquidated damages related thereto. With that, I will turn it over to Eric. Are you going to make the presentation, Mr. Casares?
Yes, I will be making the presentation.
Welcome.
Good to see you. Mr. Mayor, members of council, Eric Casares, the WRF Program Manager. Good to see everybody virtually here. I'll go ahead and share my screen and we can start with a presentation. I'll try to keep it as short as possible so that we can get into discussion and answer any questions that you might have on these 3 very important topics. We have 2 items on the agenda tonight for the WRF. The first one is for the quarterly report, the potential change orders, and the local labor discussion. And then we'll have a follow-up presentation by Paul Amico and Sarah Rosetto from our team. They're going to talk about some of the traffic control considerations for the pipeline alignment. Okay, great. So I trust that everybody can see my screen. So thank you again for having me here this evening to present on item C1. Recommendations here this evening, a couple of different items. I took a little bit of liberties with the staff report and kind of changed the order slightly because it'll help the flow and streamlining of the presentation. But the first one has to do with reviewing and receiving the WRF project quarterly report with some direction from CFAC in terms of future recommendations. So want to go through that element of the project first. Then we want to move on to review and approval of 26 change orders for the water reclamation facility. And then we'll move into the final topic, which will be the proposed local labor provisions and language and a discussion of the associated liquidated damages associated with that approach. For the quarterly report, Just a summary of current project status. The current project estimate, exceeds the baseline budget of $126 million, and I'll get into some of those details here in a second. Several major elements of the project are behind schedule, but the overall project, while being behind schedule, is not at risk of missing the TSO compliance date. Currently, the substantial completion estimate for the project is June 15th of 2022, with the TSO compliance date of February 28th of 2023. This slide here shows the budget history for the project. If you look all the way over to the left-hand column, you'll see the baseline budget that was developed at the end of fiscal year 17-18 and became the basis for the rate study that was completed by Bartle Wells. And then we've done quarterly budget reconciliations starting in Q3 of 18-19 when we started developing our monthly and quarterly reports. And you can see we've got both quarterly and annual reconciliation and baselining that we do, which brings us all the way over to the far right-hand column, which is our current budget of $130.6 million. And you'll see that there's been about a $4.5 million increase from where we were in the baseline in the previous quarters to today. We'll go over a little bit where that exceedance is coming from. So how did we get to our current budget numbers? For the water reclamation facility component of the project, we're recommending an increase of the construction contingency by about $2.9 million on top of the budget contingency that's already there for the water reclamation facility. In reality, that would go to fund the potential change orders that we're going to go and talk about here later on in my presentation. So it's a little bit of an interesting way to propose the budget revision, but in not being presumptuous and proposing a budget revision to the WRF before consideration of the change orders. That was the way that we had decided to include it in the quarterly report. In terms of the conveyance facilities, the construction estimates for the conveyance facilities are holding steady where they have been at previous quarters, but we have added in some additional biological monitoring and archaeological pre-construction testing and monitoring for that element of the project based on just the trends that we've been seeing in the programmatic agreement that we negotiated with the State Historic Preservation Office, and then obviously the final results from the biological opinion that was levied by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. In terms of the recycle water facilities, again, that project is still in the planning and design phase. We have added additional money into the budget for, again, more biological monitoring and more budget funds for some additional archaeological monitoring, again, coming out of that work that we've done with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the State Historic Preservation Office. In terms of the general project, we've added a little bit of a higher estimate for legal costs moving forward. We have some specific needs from the city attorney's office for several items. And then WIFIA closing costs. The WIFIA closing costs had been, we'd been carrying those as part of the loan and ended up handling those separately. So that was added into the cost of the project as well. Now, one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we conveyed when we start talking about changes to the project budget is what is the overall impact on the cost of the project to the city. So we've got a little bit of an analysis on the debt service payments that were assumed at a couple different time periods throughout the course of this project. And I'll focus your attention first on the left-hand column, which is essentially the rate study. So these are numbers that came out of the rate study that was completed in 2018, and it looks at the total debt service cost that was assumed when that rate study was done, and that was around $180 million. Another way that we look at numbers that may have different finishing times or different payments that last different lengths, we pull those back and we look at those in a present value, where we're looking at them on an apples to apples comparison. That present value cost of all those debt service payments in today's dollars is about $108 million. And also we look at what's the maximum annual debt service payment over the life of the project, because the debt service payment can go up or down depending on the different funding sources and the duration of those different payback periods. And so that was about $5.3 million in 2018. In 2019, in the fall, we did took a look at the project and looked at the budget and the funding sources. One of the major milestones that we had between 2018 and in the fall of 2019 is the city was placed on the fundable list for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. So when we did the rate study, we had assumed that we were not going to be receiving a construction loan from SRF. When we took a look at it in 2019, in the fall, we said, let's look at it and assume that we're going to get that money from SRF because we're going through that process and anticipate having a signed loan agreement with them. So I'll just draw your attention down to about the fourth row down, which is that present value of total debt service payments. That's gone down to about $82 million. That was in 2019 against a budget of about $126 million. Then I'll focus your attention to the right-hand column, which is some numbers that were just run by Bartle Wells in May of 2020. Again, looking at the revised budget of $130.6 million, and again, going down to that present value row, you can see that the present value or the anticipated total cost the city would pay to fund the project would be about $75 million for the debt service. You can see 2018 was about 108. 2019 with SRF, but our original project budget was $82 million. And then in 2020, looking at both SRF and the very good interest rate that we received on the WIFIA loan of 0.83%, the debt service goes down to about $75 million. So I just want to put all of the budget impacts from this budget increase into perspective. A couple of the key accomplishments and challenges that we're currently that we had over the last quarter that we're currently dealing with. A couple of big milestones here at the beginning, which is the signing of the WIFIA loan agreement for about $62 million. Again, based on the timing of that signing, the interest rate, we had been planning that interest rate to be as high as 2.5%. And got very lucky with an interest rate of about 0.83%. The other big milestone was we completed the Section 7 consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife on the California red-legged frog. We'll talk about a little bit more when we start talking about some of the PCO costs later. For the water reclamation facility, we also completed the 90% design and actually received the 100% for construction set on Friday of last week. We issued the construction notice to proceed on March 20th. So construction, as most people probably have seen, has started out at the South Bay Boulevard site. But we do have a number of change orders that we're dealing with, and we're going to talk about those tonight, which again is the reason for the budget increase. We also had a bit of a permitting issue crop up earlier this year with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife that I can talk a little bit about. It's constraining our construction a little bit right now because we don't have necessarily full reign of the site, but that's something that we're watching and trying to fix as quickly as possible so that we can avoid the cost of any future change orders. And then on the conveyance facilities, again, we received the 90% design back in February. We actually have received the 100% design drawings for this element of the project. We're working on some of the front end language, which we'll deal with when we talk about local labor, trying to get that ready to go to bid here at the end of June. Still working on some of those easement issues as we've discussed previously with both Vistra and CPUC, and I can let the city attorney address some of those questions as we get further into the process or as you have questions. And on the recycle water facilities, we're continuing to push forward with our hydrogeo work, noting that we were significantly delayed by some of the access issues earlier last year with Vistra, and trying to do our best to recoup that schedule. This is the project dashboard, shows the status of the various elements of the project. Draw your attention to a couple of them. The schedule performance index, again, a 1 of that's schedule performance index indicates the project is overall operating on schedule. And again, we're a little bit behind schedule as shown there. And then the other thing I want to draw your attention to is that bottom row, which is the compliance date countdown, which is a measure of what our anticipated completion date was going to be in terms of compliance with the TSO versus what it is now. We were monitoring float, meaning we were going to finish 365 days ahead of schedule, would give us a green. We're now at about 260 days on our current schedule in terms of finishing ahead of the TSO date for the WRF. This graph here shows our planned versus our current expenditures. And as you'll see, the red line is our planned expenditures, cumulative expenditures. The blue, as it's shifting out to the right, is depicting that schedule shift. And it finishes a little bit higher, which again, that also indicates the budget shift upwards to about 130 million. In terms of expenditures to date, about 17.6 million has been expended for non-city related costs, the development of the master plan, the environmental document, program management time, and the start of the WRF construction and design. Overall, the spending with including city costs is about 19.5 million to date. This shows an overview of the schedule, and at a glance, it gives you an idea of which elements of the project are on schedule or which ones are still behind schedule. And I'll draw your attention to the task 5, 6, and 7. 5 is our general permitting. Part of that is has to do with some of the delays that we had on getting onto the Vista property earlier last year to be able to finish our geotech and our surveying in order to finish our design and be able to submit the information that we need to Caltrans and to California Department of Fish and Wildlife, a couple of the key permitting agencies. In terms of potable reuse permitting, a similar issue. The hydrogeo work getting pushed back has extended our schedule for that item as well. And then in terms of funding, had a little bit of a delay with the SRF process, but still moving forward with hoping to have a signed loan agreement with SRF by the end of this year. A couple of key milestones to draw your attention to. Looking at the begin construction, March 20th for the water reclamation facility with an estimated substantial completion date of mid-June of 2022. Also, we look at and pay specific attention to the conveyance facilities, anticipate awarding a construction contract for that project in the 3rd week of September, with substantial completion of that portion of the project being done in late March of 2022. It's important that substantial completion of the conveyance facilities happen in a timely manner to allow us to complete the substantial or complete the WRF project without the conveyance facilities impacting it. Schedule recovery strategy. So looking at a couple of those items that are showing as behind schedule. On terms of the potable reuse permitting, we're making a big push right now to continue development of that Title 22 engineering report and get that completed to help get us back on schedule. Continue to coordinate with the Division of Drinking Water over the last several months. And for the conveyance facilities, we've pushed the the design schedule about as hard as we can, and we want to expedite the bidding for that project. Again, we're looking at around the end of June for bidding of that project. And for the WRF on-site improvements, really right now our focus is focusing on that new permitting effort with CDFW and getting over that milestone so that we can continue to work on the site without any constraints. In terms of CFAC comments, the recommendation in the staff report indicated consideration of some CFAC comments. And what you'll see here on this slide is our project schedule on the left has several hundred line items. The WRF construction schedule that we get on a monthly basis from the design build team is about 30. This version here that shows the work that's yet to be completed is about 35 pages. So one of the things that CFAC has requested is that we take more information from the WRF construction schedule and put it into our overall project schedule. Right now, we track some of the significant milestones towards the end of completion of the WRF, and we don't have a lot of intermediate milestones that we track in our project schedule. Now we update our project schedule based on what we get from the design build contractor every month in the WRF construction schedule, and we can discuss that a little bit more in terms of what they're looking for during discussion, or if you have any questions about that. I'll move on to potential change orders, and there was a presentation that was given to the Public Works Advisory Board last Wednesday. The presentation was included in the agenda package. In the interest of time, I shortened that a little bit, but obviously can delve into any of the change orders that you would like to discuss as we move forward in the discussion. Real quick, just to recap, a potential change order, or a PCO, starts where we suggest a change to what has been identified in the WRF scope of work. We look at it and we determine, is it a material change in the design build scope? If it is a material change to the design build scope, we work together with the design builder and figure out what's the raw order of magnitude of this. Is this a discretionary item that we may want to consider? If so, in order to facilitate that discussion, we want to understand generally what's the impact of that change. Is it in the tens of thousands, hundreds, or the hundreds of thousands of dollars? Once we get that raw order of magnitude cost, we discuss it as a group and figure out, is this something that we want to move forward with? If we decide we do want to move forward, then we develop, or the design build team develops, a draft PCO, and those draft PCOs were provided in the PWAB staff report that was developed for last week. It's a detailed cost estimate and a discussion of what changes are being made to the scope of work. We take that as a program management team and we review that draft PCO. Our construction cost estimators review that. We provide the DB team comments and discuss those as a group, and we negotiate that final PCO in light of those comments and discussion. So that's kind of the PCO process that we go through for the design build project. So what are we talking about here tonight? It's a total of 26 PCOs that are being considered, with a total cost impact of $6 million, total cost increase of about 6.5, with an associated cost savings of about $500,000. So the net is just shy of $6 million. Again, adoption of the PCOs would exceed the remaining contingency for the WRF component of the project, which is about $4.5 million. So again, the PCOs will result in an increase in the total project budget if all 26 of them are approved here tonight. This slide shows a little bit on the essentially how the contingency for the project has changed and what we're really asking for here tonight in terms of an impact. We have the original agreement. At that time, the GMP was about $67.2 million. We were carrying a contingency of about $6.2 million it was about 10% of it was 10% of the construction component of that $67 million. We went through last year and approved amendment number 1, which was another grouping of PCOs, was about 1.6 million, brought the GMP to 68.9 million, gave us a remaining contingency of about 4.6. We initiated amendment number 2 at the staff level earlier this year in the last couple months, something that we needed to do to amend the DB team's contract, some of the wage rates to make it compliant with the SRF and WIFIA requirements. So we took that one offline. Again, has a small impact to the GMP, about 69 million, about 4.5 left in our contingency. And now we're facing a $6 million amendment number 3. If all of the change orders are approved, takes the GMP to about 75 million. And what would that do? That would make our contingency we'd be about 1.5 million in the hole. So looking at that, saying add another $2.9 million of that into contingency, if the PCOs were approved, that would leave us with about a $75 million GMP with an additional $1.5 million contingency on top of that. That would be our position after tonight if the PCOs are approved. This is just a breakdown of the cost increase, and there's a couple of the large PCOs that are driving the overall cost increase. It's better probably to look at them in terms of the categories or what's the primary driver for a number of these PCOs. So draw your attention to the left-hand side of the graph here. About 3.3 million is associated with the biological opinion or the delays associated with the issuing of the biological opinion. That $3.3 million breaks down to about $1 million in exclusion fencing that was required by Fish and Wildlife as a result of the biological opinion, and then another $2.2 million of delay costs that have to do with the contract that we currently have with the design build team. Again, can get into the details of those as we move forward here. Another big category is changing conditions. We've done some additional water quality monitoring over the course of the last year, and I've identified that some of the design criteria in the design build RFP was not necessarily accurate or needed to be updated. Result of that has been a result in change of about $1 million. And then improved operations is another big category that we're looking at in terms of about $1 million in change orders. Again, can get into these categories or individual change orders as needed during discussion. And then real quickly, moving on to the local labor discussion. The evolution of the local labor discussion looks something like this. The city last year discussed the inclusion of a project labor agreement for the project, the remaining components of the project, the conveyance facilities and the recycle water facilities of the injection wells for the project. Ultimately, the decision was made to not move in that direction for those elements of the project. But council did direct staff to look at local labor in ways that we could incentivize contractors to maximize the use of local labor for these two major remaining major contracts. And it was actually adopted as a city goal at the end of last year for the upcoming year. We evaluated other communities. There was a memo that was included in the staff report that details that. We consulted with the funding agencies. We wanted to make sure that we weren't going to get sideways with either SRF or WIFIA, and we discussed that with them, and they had indicated that as long as we were in line with public contract code per the direction of our city attorney, that they were good with any proposed language that we were going to bring to them. And then we worked with the city attorney, developed a strategy, and then based on that strategy, developed some draft specification and agreement language that helps us implement that approach or that strategy. So really quickly, the memo that was developed by members of Carollo in March of this year, we looked at what other communities are doing. So this is just a handful of some of the other projects that members of my office and myself have been involved with over the last year or so. And so we had some good easy to obtain information on how some of these different communities are handling local labor in their public works contracts, or specifically some larger water and wastewater public works contracts. So we looked at a couple ongoing projects that we have for the city of Fresno, city of Sanger, a project just down the road for the city of Paso Robles, an SRF funded project, construction of some recycle water transmission mains, and then a wastewater project for Pismo Beach, again, another project being funded by SRF. And the results of that are included in the staff report in that memo. We compared them to what is currently being done by Morro Bay and the city's existing local labor ordinance. So what is our approach that we are presenting in the staff report and looking to discuss tonight? A couple of interesting elements of our approach. We focus not only on kind of the pre-award and things that contractors must do and provide with their initial bids, but we also look at post-award and the life of the project. We utilize the Morro Bay's existing code section 3.08.105 and the language that's included in there. We utilize the existing Morro Morro Bay good faith efforts for local labor that are included in that code section. One of the interesting things about the good faith efforts, this is something that our contractors are going to have to do when they bid our projects anyway, when in regards to disadvantaged businesses. This is a requirement from WIFIA and SRF. So it's kind of a parallel process, very similar process that we would ask the contractors to go through for local labor. And then the other element is we would utilize liquidated damages to encourage compliance during construction. So the city's existing code is pretty clear that not following through with the good faith efforts and providing evidence of that in your bid is grounds for rejection of your bid. But this takes it one step further, and we say if you're going to go ahead and procure subcontractors during construction, you need to go through these good faith efforts, and if you don't, then the city can assess you liquidated damages for breach of contract, essentially. So again, this is something that we worked with the city attorney, and we can discuss specifically. One of the items we want to discuss is potentially the value of what those liquidated damages could be. Again, what we're asking here tonight is that you review and receive the quarterly report with the direction and recommendations or consideration of the recommendations from CFAC, review and approve all 26 potential change orders for the WRF, and review and approve the proposed local labor provision language for the bid packages and the sample agreement that would go in those big packages for the conveyance facilities and the recycle water facilities components of the project, and provide a value to be used for liquidated damages for a contractor or subcontractor failing to comply with local labor good faith efforts during construction. With that, I can take any questions and we can go into discussion.
Hey, thank you for that comprehensive overview, Eric. Very much appreciated. I'm going to bring it back to council now for questions, and then open up public comment after that. And Councilmember Heller, would you like to start us off, sir?
Questions? Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First thing, I want to commend the members of the CFAC and the PWAB who have put in hundreds of hours reviewing this information and coming up with great questions. As the council liaison to the PWAB, I want to thank each and every one of you. You're an impressive group and you asked some great questions, some of which I'm going to re-ask right now because I think they're important and they really hit the nail on the head, so to speak. One of the questions, I'm not going to identify what PWAB member it came from, but the first one is, how come we didn't know about these change orders ahead of time? Can I get an answer?
Oh,
from you, Mr.
Sorry. I was just taking notes. I want to make sure that I capture all of these questions. So we had an idea of and had been discussing internally a number of these change orders. As you can imagine, a couple of them were in flux. A couple of the larger ones were in flux. We didn't necessarily know about. Well, let's take the first piece.
Well, I'll try and narrow it down. You don't have to go through the whole list, but the two big ones that I think concern most people are what you've labeled biological opinion, when really those are owner delays, in my opinion, which happened in October. And I've asked in several meetings, are there more PCOs coming? When are we going to see them, et cetera, et cetera? Boom, the bombshell comes, $2.4 million in delays that occurred in October. And here we are, the end of May. It's the first we've heard of it. So I think it's a really good question from this PWAB member. And I'd like to know why we didn't hear about it before now.
Yeah, we had discussed and provided in the monthly and quarterly reports that we were tracking, and we knew that we were going to be assessed costs for these delays after we did not meet the October 23rd, 2019 deadline for issuing a construction notice to proceed. And we didn't know what the value of those was going to be. And up until several weeks ago, we were working to negotiate the value of at least the $2.2 million change order with the design build team, working with a couple of key members from city staff. And so literally we didn't know what the final value of that was going to be until we started developing the quarterly.
Excuse me, Mr. Caceres, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have so much to talk about. So I get that. Aren't those just percentages of the cost of the construction contract? Or am I mistaken?
No, there's two separate items that deal in the contract that deal with the delays. One has to do with the notice to proceed delay, and those are essentially costs that the design build team has incurred anticipating a notice to proceed earlier than it received. So it had staff that it had to pay for and everything else. The second item has to do with escalation, and that escalation is resulting from an extension of the contract time.
Those are not complex calculations, are they?
The calculations are pretty complex because they have to be substantiated, at least for the NTP delay. And then we worked with the design build team. And one of the items that we didn't get into here, but was discussed at PWAB, was the way that those costs were calculated. And actually, yeah.
Okay, so next question is, why aren't our rates, and this really is for the council, I think, because it has a lot to do with decisions made over the last several years. Why aren't our rates being reduced as a result of getting the 0.83% financing? I mean, that was what we told everybody would happen if we got this great financing, and wow, did we get some great financing. But nobody seems to be talking about reducing rates to the ratepayers, which was something that was kind of promised, I think. Moving on to the next one. This is for you, Mr. Caceres. So isn't the red-legged frog a common thing to deal with on projects like ours?
It is, and the environmental document was comprehensive and was done in accordance with the requirements for federal funding. It looked at things like the California red-legged frog. Just over the last couple of years, the red-legged frog and the way that it's been handled in the county has changed a little bit. And essentially, most of the county is designated as prime red-legged frog habitat. Now, does that mean that every project that gets done has to go through a formal consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife? No, that's not the case. But they are looking at it a little bit of a different way. We're not building within a stream bed where we have active water flowing or anything like that. Fish and Wildlife deemed that our site could be a transitory path for California red-legged frogs, which is, again, a newer trend, something that one of the other sanitation agencies in the county is also dealing with, or had to also deal with, right around the same time as we did. They didn't anticipate it to be an issue, but again, they were in a transitory path, and so they had to go down the formal consultation, or they had to go through the consultation pathway as well. So it's something that we looked at. We looked at, and it was just I don't want to say the luck of the draw, but it was something that Fish and Wildlife chose to dig their heels into in terms of the one of the three endangered species that we have to deal with on our project.
Okay, and then so obviously you have a lot of agencies to deal with. You guys started in October of 2018, I believe, Corolla did. And when did you first have a contact or a meeting of some sort with Fish and Wildlife Service?
So that process with U.S. Fish and Wildlife started, we started preparing our letter, or excuse me, the Section 7 consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife is required for a project receiving federal funds. So this is a process that the EPA, as the lead agency, needs to go through with other federal agencies, Fish and Wildlife being one. So we worked with them in June and early July to develop the letter that essentially stated our opinion, which was consistent with our environmental document. We know that we are going to be impacting the red-legged frog, but we don't think we're going to be significantly adversely impacting. And we laid that out for the red-legged frog, the tidewater goby, and the shoulder band snail, which are the three species that we're impacting. And we sent that letter to Fish and Wildlife. WFIA requires that they receive a response from Fish and Wildlife, and Fish and Wildlife took about 3 months to get back to us. We waited for 3 months to get word back from them, and in early October we heard from them, and they said, well, we agree with you on the snail and on the goby, but on the red-legged frog we do not.
Okay. So I read in the report somewhere, the staff report, that you've incorporated the PCOs into the construction documents. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So is that a common Carollo practice or your practice to incorporate potential change orders into construction documents before they've been approved by the owner?
Based on the timing of it and the nature of it as being a design build project, we made the decision to do that in the hopes that they would be approved. If they're not approved, then we're going to have to change those back in the IFC set. But that was the decision based on timing and when we could come to council. Now, we weren't necessarily planning to come to council at this date. We were delayed a little bit because of some things outside of our control. But the plan was to come to council a little bit earlier before the 90% was finalized. But that was not the case.
Okay, and then looking at your budget revision summary, which is table 2 on the staff report, it looks like. So contingency. Mm-hmm. If we go with your current number of about 131 million or 130.6 million, you're showing a total project contingency, total program contingency of 10.2 million. Mm-hmm. And the 6 million would come off of that. Is that correct?
That's correct. So yeah, so again, not adding the dollars directly to the water reclamation facility, but adding it to contingency for consideration by council. Yeah, that $6 million would come out of that and would leave.
Yeah, I did the math. 4.264.
Correct. Yeah, $1.5 million would be part of the water reclamation facility project. We're trying to track contingency for the different elements of the project separately.
Right. So the 4.264 million, according to my math, which could be wrong, is 3.25% contingency remaining for the entire program. Is that correct? Is that really 4.264 million?
That's correct.
We haven't really broken ground. We broke ground kind of on the WRF, but a lot of I think we're going to need a lot more than that in contingency for the piping project, which is where you typically spend a lot of money tearing up things you didn't know were there.
We've got engineers contingency, engineering or design contingency inherent in the costs that we're carrying for the pipelines and pump station now, plus an additional 10% for essentially construction related contingency or changes that might happen during construction.
Okay, so in the future, can you break all that out so that I can see what contingency is left for each of the 3 projects?
I can, yes. There's a footnote on table 2. That footnote 1 breaks down that contingency amount. Now, granted, it's a little bit interesting this quarter because we have the 10.3 million and the breakdown for the water reclamation facility post change orders would not be the 7.5. It would be the 1.5. But that's included in the footnote in that table.
Let me just ask you something. Let's be honest here. Do you have the sense that this project is going well?
I do, yes.
Okay, those are all my questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Heller. Appreciate that. Councilmember Davis, sir.
Yes, thank you. And sorry, trying to start the video. All right. Okay. And Eric, you answered many of my questions before the meeting. I'd like to review a couple of them.
Okay.
On one of your slides, you talked about avoidance of certain areas on the WRF site is causing construction inefficiencies that could result in a future PCO. Can you explain that, please?
Yes, so we've had a little bit of issues with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, so a separate entity from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. as is typical, we identify any features in the project that could be within the jurisdiction of the permitting agencies, whether it be U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Regional Board, California Department of Fish and Wildlife. We had a wetland delineation report that was done in 2018 in support of the original EIR and then the EIR addendum that clearly stated that what we believed to be jurisdictional for our project. And in typical project, we would move forward and we would notify those agencies for those different elements that are jurisdictional, that we believe to be jurisdictional, and move on from there. Well, Coastal Commission included in our coastal development permit later last year that required us to get sign off from a number of different agencies, one of them being California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So we said, okay, that's great, no big deal. We went to them, we went to Army Corps of Engineers, we went to the regional board, all three of them earlier in 2019. Very quickly got responses from U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. yes, nothing on the WRF site is jurisdictional or water of the United States. The regional board said, yeah, we agree, none of this is jurisdictional and a water of the state. And we went to CDFW and we didn't hear anything. And we continued to ask them for and press them for a response until we got to a point where we needed to start construction. And we continued to push. And finally, they came back and said, we can't agree with you based on the information you've provided. You need to go through a notification process. And that's what we've been doing for the last, since September of last year. But we started talking and pressing CDFW in the summer of last year, once we identified that that was going to be a requirement of the coastal development permit.
Okay. Specifically, I think we're talking about an erosion feature where we believe that that's simply a wrinkle in the earth, and CDFW is looking at it as a potential stream bed. Is that correct? That's correct. And so we are expecting them to give us an SAA, which is a stream bed alteration agreement? That's correct. Yeah, so we're anticipating that. They haven't said 100% yet if they're going to make us do that, but we've jumped through just about every hoop that we could possibly jump through, and I'm still waiting on them to give the final yes on the SAA. But we've just, as early as middle of last week, we were providing additional information, doing additional analysis to help move this process along. And what happens if we do not get the SAA? I don't think it's a question of if we're going to get an SAA, or if they deem we need an SAA, they will either say, yeah, we are going to need an SAA because it is jurisdictional, which is the direction that they're leaning, but they haven't said it in black and white language. Yes, you're going to need the SAA. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of the timing. And so we're pushing them as hard as we can to get that process expedited. We've gone through every channel that we have available to us to try to influence Fish and Wildlife for them to move quickly. They understand that every day that that we get delayed, it has the potential to impact the cost of the project. And so it's hopefully within a matter of a couple of weeks that we can get that SAA. Okay. This next question may be for Chris. The conveyance easements are going through an eminent domain process, and SLO County Superior Courts have just reopened their dockets for jury trials. So do we have an idea when our case will be heard?
Good evening, Councilmember Davis. The court right now has set a hearing date for July 16th for the pre-judgment possession order. And the court set that date a while ago. And as far as we know, they still plan on keeping that date. It's possible that the court could push that out. The courts are prioritizing what they hear and don't hear. And this is considered to be an important matter. Okay, that's good. And then Eric, again, you said the city is going to need to drill a new pilot injection well.
do we anticipate that we will have access problems such as have held up previous injection wells?
So we negotiated an access agreement with Vistra late last year, early this year, which was what allowed us to get onto their property and access that Morro Bay Mutual Water Company well and do the pump testing that we needed to do, which was good. We were able to do the pump testing. We examined the well, and based on our examination, we determined that it wasn't sufficient to do the pilot injection testing. Now that agreement is it's specific to the use of that existing well. So we're likely going to need to negotiate a modification to that agreement to drill a pilot well. We had been hoping that we weren't going to have to, but there was no way for us to put our eyes on the condition of that well until we were able to negotiate that agreement and get on site.
Okay, so that's still contingent. We don't have that firmly in hand yet.
Yeah, our agreement that we currently have, our current access agreement, is specific to the use of the well and being able to use that well to do the pilot injection testing.
Okay. On PCO 44, the primary rationale, which is under the specific examples, can you explain what that rationale is and what it means and why it requires a change order? And that's on page 111 of the staff report.
Yeah, this was, there's a number of change orders in here that have resulted as we've gone through the 60 and the 90% design, and we've gone through some of the different reasons for those change orders. Many of them are pretty straightforward in terms of it's something that we've identified as either there was a hole in the RFP when it was developed, so we have a hole in the scope of work, and we need to fill that hole and make a change to the design. That one was one in addition to several others that were pretty contentious with the design build team. Now, I will say that the RFP did not spell out what the access requirements were for the different process areas. And so the design build team took liberty of interpreting what was in or what was not in the RFP. And based on what they gave us, we deemed that to be not sufficient. And maybe it's a little bit of there's a little bit of nuance here, but not sufficient. Their argument is that what they were giving us was sufficient. Our argument was that it was not sufficient, and so that change order had started out at quite a bigger amount, and through negotiations with the design build team and based on our interpretation, we were able to get that down. But it did ultimately results in a change order.
Okay, so the $210,000 is a compromise with them. All right.
Yeah, and it's specific to a number of different elements that were added in terms of staircases and access platforms and other things that, you can't go into the design build RFP and say, and find where it says, this tank shall have stairs and this handrail and this access. It says adequate access in a number of places. Yeah. And so that interpretation was taken.
Yeah, I saw the drawing, and certainly we do need the added safety features. On PCO 67, that's an improved operations, BNR system modifications. There's mention of an alternative process control proposed by the DB team. Can you explain what the contention is there and why this has resulted in a large amount of change?
Yeah, so this is something that the message, the mantra has been from the city, well before I was here, and continues to be that cost is the overarching factor in terms of this project. And so the city encouraged design build teams to come forward in their proposals with innovative solutions that would save capital costs. So one of those things that ultimately the Felance Black and Beach team, the winning team, brought to the table was a different control system and a different means of operating the aeration basins, allowing us to essentially provide less air. It has some not only capital cost savings, but it also has a potential O&M savings in terms of electricity in the future. This is something that initially we evaluated and thought we would be comfortable with in the full scale facility. But as we started to let the project develop, identified with staff that there was some apprehension to using this type of treatment scheme. Because it was maybe not as proven as we would have liked. So there were only a handful of agencies that were using it, and most of those agencies were pretty large. And so in working with Joe, identified that if something were to happen and this was actually quite a bit more difficult to operate than what we were anticipating, then those savings from capital cost and energy costs could be wiped out pretty quickly with the additional staff time that would be necessary to operate that facility. So ultimately, through the discussions with the city and then negotiations with the DB team, that's where we landed on that change order, which is essentially to take the facility and make it operate more like a conventional facility.
Okay, and I remember at the time that the council did encourage phrasing in the RFP that asked for innovative solutions that would save money. But in this case, you're saying that this solution is a little too innovative and is just not going to work for our purposes.
That's correct.
Okay. PCOs 32 and 56, the phrase is changing conditions. And can you explain what those changing conditions are that cause those PCOs to be proposed?
Sure. So when we got on board and evaluated the proposals and started to negotiate a final scope and contract with the design build team and reviewing the design criteria, we identified that some of the design criteria that was in the RFP was not as robust as it could have been. And so the plan was made last year to do some additional water quality sampling and look at a couple of different quite a few different constituents that we needed some more data on that would inform the design of the reverse osmosis system and essentially the disinfection process that we're using for the advanced treated water. Based on that data that we collected and analyzed, it was identified that the numbers that were included in the RFP were a little bit too low in some of these constituents. And so that triggered a number of different changes to the design criteria. So it resulted in the need for some chemical addition for pH control. And then for the reverse osmosis system itself, we had to change the material construction for several components of that, as well as change the operating pressure for that. And so that resulted in some additional costs. Now we're just going through and finalizing the procurement of that reverse osmosis system within the last month or so, which is why we didn't know exactly what the cost impact for those PCOs were going to be until we got through that procurement process with them. But that's where those are coming from.
Okay, so it has to do with the quality of the water.
Correct.
Okay. PCO 16, modify the outfall pump station, and that's based on purified water production during peak wet weather events. What does that mean, please?
So very simply, the treatment plant produces tailored water essentially for the advanced treatment facility. So it takes and treats a certain portion of the water coming into the plant. It takes it and treats it to advanced levels, and that's the water that would be injected into the ground. The remaining flow So the peak flows that occur that are in excess of the capacity of the advanced treatment system, they, before going through reverse osmosis and advanced oxidation disinfection, it goes through simple disinfection, and then it goes out to the outfall. And there's a pump station that pumps that flow to the outfall. There's two separate pump stations, one that's going to pump purified water from the treatment plant to the injection fields, and one that's going to pump treated water meant to go to the outfall to the ocean. So the way that the RFP was set up and the design criteria was presented in there is that it had assumed that the advanced treatment facilities were going to operate even when we hit the highest peak wet weather flows that we were anticipating, which is about 8 MGD. So the treatment plant's designed for a 1 MGD average, but understand we get high peak wet weather flows that only last, by definition, it's the peak hour that we would see over the life of the facility is over 8 MGD. So the RFP had said, okay, well, if we hit a peak flow of 8 MGD, 7 of it roughly will be going to the outfall, and another 1 MGD would be going to the advanced treatment system. After looking at that and passing that through the filter of what would be reasonable, if and when peak flows of that magnitude are seen at the treatment plant, the last thing on operations staff mind will be producing advanced treated water to go to the injection well. Their sole focus will be on getting that water adequately treated to go to the ocean and getting it out to the ocean. And so that's why we needed to increase the size of that pump station over what was included in the RFP. And then the other thing was, understanding that the pipeline that's being designed to take that water to the outfall was not designed when we went through the design build procurement process. So the design build team had to assume what the operating pressure of that pipeline was going to be until that pipeline was final designed. Well, they had assumed one thing, and based on the hydraulics and the final design of the pipeline, it was determined the operating pressure needed to be a little bit higher. So that change order is the result of two things. One, it's upsizing the pumps itself so that they can produce a higher head and work with the final pipeline design. And then it's also the addition of capacity to that pump station so that we don't need to use the advanced treatment facilities during those peak wet weather flows.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question that I have has to do with the biological opinion. It looks as if we are going to spend $856,000 to build permanent exclusion fencing around the site to prevent the entry of the California red-legged frog. So I would like to know if U.S. Fish and Wildlife produced evidence of any documented sighting ever of a red-legged frog on this site or anywhere in the vicinity of the project.
I know that there's been red-legged frogs that have been sighted in the vicinity of the project. And Choro Creek is the one that comes to mind as we're talking. The biological surveys that were done by our biologist, who's still on the project, that work that was done to support the environmental document, we never observed red-legged frogs on the site. And Fish and Wildlife never sent out a biologist to the site to look for red-legged frogs. To my knowledge, there is not anything published that says that they've seen red-legged frogs on the site. The finding in their letter that they sent to us in October 2019, it said that their basis for disagreeing with our opinion was we had our site had a proximity to suitable habitat, meaning the drainage that runs, the stream that runs near our site is quote unquote suitable habitat. The possibility that the red-legged frog could use that drainage or the adjacent area to disperse as a dispersal corridor, meaning they would move across our site from the drainage on one side to waterways on the other site. And then the other thing that they cited was that we were taking about 7 acres of habitat that would result from the construction of the water reclamation facility. So the inside the fence structure or the inside the fence site for the water reclamation facility is about 7 acres. So those were the 3 rationale that they used. No mention of, frogs have been found here in the past. And I will say that we started construction during the rainy season. We abided by all the requirements that were put forth in the biological opinion, and we have not had any take of the California red-legged frog during the construction. And we are now out of the rainy season. I will say that ended on April 15th. So,
okay. Thank you so much for answering my questions. I know it took a lot of your time to delve into this, and I appreciate your expertise in being able to address those. So that's all my questions. Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis. And Councilmember McPherson, please.
Thank you. And thank you, Eric, for the presentation. And thank you for including the answers to the multitude of questions that both advisory boards had. I didn't think there'd be any questions left after seeing all of the comments that you responded to. But I have a couple, and many of them have already been asked. So thank you, Red. I had a lot of questions about the specific PCOs, but let me ask first a general question. Given that the WRF itself is a design-build contract, in your experience, how likely is it that there are going to be some potential change orders from the contractor, especially during that design phase?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And we anticipate typically during a design build that we are going to identify most of our change orders prior to construction. Most change orders during construction, there can be changes that are owner initiated during construction, but most of the issues that change orders arise during construction is a disagreement between the contract documents and what the contractor had included in their bid. And so by definition, the design build process kind of eliminates that finger pointing that can occur between the design build team and the design team. So we anticipate seeing majority of the change orders pre-construction.
And you're suggesting it's really not that uncommon because you don't have perfect knowledge of what's going to happen during the design phase. Is that correct? I mean, you can write the RFP to be as specific as possible, but can it be perfect so that it anticipates every possible contingency?
Yeah, that's the kind of the art that goes into the design build procurement, and the reason why design build is a lot of people have the fear of it because it's kind of an unknown, but you're always trying to draw that line between being prescriptive enough so that you don't have some of these issues where things like access potentially and those kinds of things can be interpreted in a different way. But you also don't want to provide too high of a level of design because then you've also have taken away some of the benefits that you get with the design build process of allowing for the design build team to infuse some innovation. And we have some very good examples of that design build process and playing out and providing some value to the design and in the safe system and the way that we're handling the high stormwater flows is one of them. The alternative operational strategy for the aeration basins was another innovative approach. At the end of the day, it's not going to make it off the cutting room floor, and I think it's the right decision for the city of Morro Bay and an agency that's already taking on a lot of complexity in the wastewater treatment process. So. Yeah, that is the difficult thing with design build and procurement of design build is striking that balance between too much design and not enough design.
Right. So you're suggesting basically that you would not expect more substantial change orders from the design build team.
Yeah, we have a couple of change orders that we're dealing with now. We do have something that we do have just to give everybody an idea of some of the things that we're going to be bringing to you. There's a couple that have been identified through this last round of review from the 90% design. There was a redundancy question on a pump that had kind of fallen through the cracks, and we didn't didn't realize we didn't have a redundant pump, or we just hadn't caught it through this process yet. We're also looking at COVID-related impacts potentially. There's a couple of things that we're going to be dealing with. The magnitude is on the order of maybe about $150,000 of things that we're currently looking at. So just to give you an idea of what's currently out there, it was a little bit preliminary to bring those to council because we haven't had the time to adequately review those and vet those, but that is currently what's sitting on our plate right now.
So you have described the process that you use to negotiate the potential change orders with the contractor. Could you, and you've gone into detail on some of the issues, so it isn't that you just take their word for it. You do due diligence to actually explore and negotiate, and you don't just, is that correct?
Yeah, I think there's really, as I mentioned before, there's really two categories of change orders. There's ones where, we sit around together and we identify something that we think is the project would benefit the project or the project needs that very clearly is not part of the design build team's original scope. And that very quickly moves into that range of a design change. What starts as a design change or a changing condition goes into a PCO. And then there's others where we identify something and we say, well, that's not what we thought we were going to get, or that's not how we interpret the contract language, which is a different type of negotiation. In that negotiation, we're questioning the validity potentially of the change order. We see that there needs to be a change, but who's responsible for paying for it is the other piece. And in that case, it's kind of a double layered negotiation that we go through. One, we go through and vet and with the city figure out, is this really something that the city should be paying for? And then if that's the case, then we move on to the second layer, which all PCOs receive, is we do a detailed review by our construction cost estimators do a detailed review of every change order. It doesn't matter the size or the amount. And then based on that, we then negotiate some of the specifics. Why are you using this labor rate here for this type of task? Why are you using this rate right here for this material? It doesn't seem to be consistent with another PCO that we looked at, or isn't consistent with the cost indices or our experience. And so every single PCO, whether it's you're right, this is a PCO, we want this, we realize it wasn't in the original RFP, all PCOs get that level of rigor.
Okay, so could you talk about PCO number 039, which is the notice to proceed delay at a cost of $1.2 million? How was that negotiated, or what was the source of the dispute in that? You negotiated it down, correct?
Yeah, so the delay triggered, as I mentioned, two different things. The language in the design build contract was very clear around escalation. If we went 12 months without issuing a construction notice to proceed, the design build team could come back with, and it was justifiable, could ask for an increase in the contract amount based on escalation, and we did that. The second piece is the NTP delay, and there was some disagreement between the design build team and the program manager and city as to the way that the language was written and what cost increase was allowed. And the city firmly took the stance of we have 12 months, and if we don't issue a construction notice to proceed within 12 months, the city's not liable for any of those costs. That was the design build team took the opposite interpretation of the contract, as can happen, and so we worked very closely and ultimately ended up negotiating a fair and reasonable resolution to that, which was somewhere in between where the city wanted to be and somewhere in between where the design build team wanted to be on the value. And that negotiation was led by myself and Kyle Rohr from Carollo, and worked directly with Scott Collins and the design build team.
Okay, thank you. So we've already talked about the issue of the red-legged frog, but I just want to ask, is that an issue that you could have foreseen in advance in terms of the approach taken by U.S. Fish and Wildlife?
As I mentioned, our biologist does a lot of work in the county. Not every project in the county is hamstrung by the California red-legged frog. Not even all the projects that are federally funded are impacted by California red-legged frog. And so, but the whole county, most of the county is designated as habitat for the red-legged frog. So I think that it was handled sufficiently in the environmental document. It's just one of those things that, as I mentioned, the proper level of rigor went into the environmental document, and that was reviewed by EPA. It was just that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, based on our site and based on their interpretation and how things were being interpreted now, they took the position of we don't agree with your finding.
Right. And it's because of the WIFI alone that we had to go through that process. If we hadn't applied for that, we wouldn't have had the U.S. Fish and Wildlife involved, correct?
That's correct. Well, if we would have received federal dollars from a different source, USDA would have had a similar requirement tied to it. If we were just going after the state revolving fund money, much of that money is coming through. It's federal money that's given to the states to disperse, and so we would have had to go through that similar process if it was SRF, and we did go through that process with SRF, but WIFIA was really the lead agency because of the timing of the two loans that the city's getting.
Okay. And I'd like to just have you verify that this increase in cost of the project itself does not negatively impact the rates that ratepayers will have. And I believe Councilmember Heller mentioned that we are hopefully, because we did get such a good loan rate, and hopefully we'll also get a low SRF loan rate, that we will eventually be able to possibly not assess the full amount of the $41 surcharge per month. But can you explain why we wouldn't be doing that right now?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I wanted to address there. So I did want to be clear that if we were carrying a $126 million project and we'd received the lower rates and we weren't exceeding the budget right now, that would be more cost savings to the city. So I don't want to minimize the importance of keeping the budget as low as possible, because every dollar that we save is going to be a dollar saved to the city, regardless of where the funding, how the funding lines up. But in terms of the funding and the cost, yeah, it's a figment of the rates that we've received for WIFIA and the confirmation that we've got from SRF that we're going to receive funding from them. A prudent move in 2018 was to not make that assumption, even more so with the change in the SRF program in the last couple of years. So I think that was the right thing to do. The right thing to do back then. And the second part of your question had to do with, why not reduce the rates now? I don't remember the specifics in terms of the council's decision on the rate review process, but we have a couple of big milestones coming up. One of them is going to be awarding the construction contract for the pipeline portion. So once we've awarded the contract for the DB, that was a huge portion of the total budget. We award the contract for the conveyance facilities. That between those two things, that's the lion's share of the total budget for the project. We have some cost surety once we go through that process on the conveyance pipeline. So I think it would be prudent to wait to go through the bidding process for the pipelines before taking a look. And then the other thing would be locking in the SRF rate. So the SRF rate currently is about 1.4%. When we looked at it in October of 2019, it was at 1.3%. We've been assuming we've been adding about 0.3% on top of what the current rate is whenever we do our analysis of the debt service costs. But we don't know exactly what's going to happen with rates between now and when we anticipate getting that signed loan agreement. So I think those are the two biggest milestones. We're hoping that, and I'll tell you right now, just to be honest, I can't tell you what this current situation with COVID-19 is doing to what it's doing to bid pricing. I've heard stories of lower costs, no change in costs, fewer bidders, more bidders. A couple of recent examples in the area where we've received maybe more bids than we would have typically, but that's kind of an unknown as well that we're currently watching, and we definitely want to get that project out, get it to bid, get it awarded. But that's another really important milestone to get over. Before looking at what is the amount of the rates that need to be collected.
And it's true, we've also let some contracts for some of the capital improvement projects from the One Water plan, which is also funded with the rate increase. Is that correct?
Can you repeat the first part of the question?
We have already let some RFPs for, in fact, we've awarded, I believe, a contract for some of the One Water capital improvement projects, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a question with respect to the pipelines and the lift stations project. Would it be possible to separate that into 2 or 3 separate projects or bids, one for the lift stations and possibly splitting the pipeline project in 2? And the reason I'm asking the question is that it would allow smaller, maybe perhaps local firms to compete for the bids. A company could obviously bid on all 3, but or 2, and would get it if it was the lowest bid. But I'm just wondering if that's feasible, or if you've thought about that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that's feasible. I know we talked about it last year, specifically when we talked about the local labor and entertaining and the project labor agreement. That was one of the things that was discussed. Is by splitting that project up, would you entice more local participation? Off the top of my head, it's about a 2/3, 1/3 in terms of the total cost. Let's just call the total cost $24 million. 2/3 of that is the pipeline, so $16 million, and $8 million is wrapped up in the pump stations. The only problem with that is coordination. Obviously, when you've got multiple contracts, we're already got to do coordination between the design build facility, the WRF, and the other components, and making sure that those come together seamlessly. That's also a difficult thing with the pump stations and the pipeline. So that would be one reason, would be kind of the single point of responsibility in terms of one contractor to point the finger at if something goes wrong, and then you also don't have those claims of each contractor on those respective projects pointing their fingers at each other for why one's delayed and why one's delaying the other. So that's one consideration, and then potentially the cost for managing the project in terms of construction management, and then would be higher. And then the other thing is just the general conditions that each contractor is carrying, the mobilization costs, all of those different things. You're going to get some economy of scale for keeping that as one construction project. So those are the 2 things that you would potentially weigh. Splitting this in contract into 2, would it entice more local participation? I think that the size, even if you were to split it out, you're talking about the difference between an $8 million project potentially for the pump stations versus 24 for the total. I don't necessarily think that you would get a lot of different folks based on that size and that split. But it's really, what's the value of splitting it in terms of local participation versus potentially some of the extra cost and the extra risk that comes in with multiple contractors.
Well, it sounds like you've considered it, and that's all I was really asking. Then, with respect to the local labor provisions in the bid documents, if I read the memo from Anthony, is it Simo?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. He basically said that any project funded by a government entity that prohibit labor preferences, therefore the local labor preferences cannot be applied to any components of the WRF project. So you can give a preference, but you can obviously include language that would suggest So is this idea about liquidated damages, is that also legal?
Yeah, that was actually something, I'll tell you, it wasn't necessarily where I was going with this. I knew that we could not give the local labor preferences for these projects because that would not be allowed because of the federal funding. So I knew that wasn't going to be a possibility. And I knew that we were probably looking at something, like we can do everything we can to encourage the agencies the contractors to use local labor. And it's similar to what's done with the disadvantaged businesses as well. You can't force the contractors to use the disadvantaged businesses, but they need to either do that or they need to go through the effort to try to identify those subcontractors that are out there. So yeah, that's the liquidated damages based on the direction of the city attorney would be in line with public contract code and would be allowed for federally funded projects. And the liquidated damages, as I mentioned, only occur for the instances that would occur during construction, where additional subcontractors or additional general contracting staff would need to be brought onto the project. The good faith efforts would need to be done. And if they are not done, then the city could assess those liquidated damages.
Okay. And do you have a recommendation for the amount that we should include?
And looking at a couple of other contracts or a couple other agencies and looking at their provisions for local labor percentages and those kinds of things, and also looking at liquidated damages, I think for a project of this size, something in the order of $5,000 to $10,000 per occurrence. Again, we're not asking them or telling them they need to use local labor, and we're not making the project too onerous. Even the efforts that need to be done as the contract language is currently written, they would need to, essentially they would come to us as the program manager or the construction manager on site and say, for the conveyance facilities, for example, we now need to hire a new subcontractor for landscaping. And then they would talk with our team and they would say, we would plan to go through, we've done a look. There aren't any, let's just say there aren't any local subcontractors. They have the ability to kind of tailor those good faith efforts during the construction process and work with the construction manager to figure out what the right level of good faith efforts is. So there really isn't any excuse during construction for that contractor not to follow the process that's laid out and be assessed those liquidated damages. But I think the liquidated damages it gives the whole thing some teeth. In terms of asking people to do something, it definitely helps that encouragement when there's a financial impact tied to it.
Yeah, there's a stick. Okay, my last question, as the liaison to the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee, I want to thank you for bringing forward the recommendations from the last meeting. They had asked me as a liaison to do that, so I appreciate your doing that. So I just want to ask a question about the request, and that is, how much time and effort and money do you think it would take to make that kind of a change in the report that you prepare? Because it's the balance between how much detail and how much, it seems to me you could also just kind of provide that detail to those people who want it as opposed to including it in your report. But it would take some effort on your part to make those changes to the report. So I'm just wondering how much.
Yeah, I think that the changes to the report, and if I'm clear from the discussion and looking back at my notes from last week, the discussion was really, we have a project or program schedule that we use to manage the general project activities and then the activities for the three separate construction components of the project. For the design build for the treatment plant, we have a schedule that we're given on a monthly basis by the design build team, and it accompanies their payment application. We struggle with the need to add in a bunch of milestones into our project schedule rather than because the contractor is not contractually tied to intermediate milestones in that schedule. We don't really see a need to kind of duplicate that effort in the project schedule. Now, can we add some additional milestones for different process areas when they're completed? We can do that. I think that the effort really in this is not the effort that goes into the actual report itself. It probably goes into more of the update of the schedule, kind of updating the format of the schedule and adding additional elements to the schedule. And then also kind of that monthly, every fourth week, and we're going through our schedule updates every week, but every fourth week when we receive the design build schedule, we would need to go through and do a little bit more effort. We're talking about, probably, let's call it 8 hours a month, something on that order.
Okay, all right, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Addis, questions, please.
I think this is one of the benefits of going at the end is that all of my questions have been answered, including questions that I had about the local labor portion of this. So I very much appreciate the thoroughness, and my colleagues on council who obviously have excellent questions. Many of mine were the same, and so I'm good on the questions.
Okay, thank you. And very comprehensive questions. I do appreciate that. I do have a couple of specifics for you, Eric, that I'd like to ask. And one of them, my first question actually goes back to the RFP that was let for the design build project. In your opinion, would it be fair to say that it lacked significant specificity?
I would say that this is on a sliding scale. It would definitely be on the end of being less specific. So in terms of the drawings and the information that was included in the RFP package, it would be on the less specific end, and it would be I lost my train of thought here with what I was going to say, but it's definitely on the less specific end and leaves more to interpretation for the design build team.
Which often can, is it correct to assume that often can lead to significant PCOs, changes in costs because of the lack of specificity?
Yeah, it can on certain elements, and so depending on the needs of the owner, if there's things in the design build RFP that the owner is not willing to compromise on that are not spelled out, then that often can lead to a situation where a change order can arise.
And were you and your team project management, the project management folks that were involved in the preparation of that document?
No, we came on board a couple of weeks before the, let me make sure I get my dates right, a couple of weeks before the proposals, the design build proposals were turned in.
So it's fair to say, or it's a correct statement, that the former program manager, Nunley and Associates, basically were responsible for that document.
Yeah, other people were, the previous program management team was responsible for that document.
And was Mr. Mueller manager at the time of our plant? At the time the RFP was let?
He was. I would have to have Joe comment on when exactly he started during the process, but I know he has not been around for the whole evolution of the facility master plan and the design build RFP and all those elements.
It's fair to say that he was not significantly involved in the early portions of the development of the project.
I don't believe so. Not in the early elements.
Okay. So the reason I asked that question, and it goes back to PCO number 67, which I think is an excellent example of the lack of specificity of an RFP, and that is the BNR system modifications. And and being part of the subcommittee with Councilmember McPherson, we had the opportunity to vet these PCOs in detail. And this was one that particularly stood out to me because of the high cost, about $742,000. And this primarily had to do with the ammonia-based aeration control portion of the project that was proposed by the design build team, right?
Correct.
Okay, and as I recall from our discussions, because we had lots of questions, the subcommittee did at that time, this particular system had not been well, there were not many examples of it being implemented in plants our size, nor were there many positive comments, if any, made by those operators with regard to cost containment and improvement in operations based upon this system. Am I recalling that correctly?
Yeah, you're recalling that correctly. I think it's a process that I believe will work, but it's not typically used or has not been typically used in the situation the unique situation that Morro Bay is in. There are other plants out there that are using this control. They have plants that can operate in a more conventional mode, but they've made changes to their plants with instrumentation to allow them to operate more in this mode. In order to realize those O&M savings. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't really have a huge impact on the overall operation of the facility. And that's not the case here. We have to have that ABAC control system. It must operate correctly, or we can't produce advanced treated water. And so that was the unique situation that we found ourselves here in Morro Bay.
And this may be supposition, but my assumption, and I'll say it's my assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, would be that potentially if you as project manager and your team had been involved, and if Mr. Mueller had been involved early in evaluating this as a proposed cost savings measure, it may not have been determined to be acceptable. Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I think that I will say that as I mentioned earlier, when Ms. McPherson asked the question about the less prescriptive versus more prescriptive, this was an innovative solution that the design build team brought to the table to reduce the cost of the project to Morro Bay, but to also help be the low cost so that they could be selected. If we had been involved earlier on, it may not have made it to that point in the process. It may not have made it to the proposal process. It may have been stopped short of the proposal process.
Okay, thanks. I think that's a fair answer. Page 46 of the staff report. One of your project slides, I'm not sure which one, but the rate study budget versus the 2019 financial update versus the 2020 debt service projections. The way I look at this in terms of a project, we're looking at the capital costs, like I'm buying a house and what it costs me or what I pay for the house that I'm buying.
Correct.
And then because I have to finance it, because I can't pay cash for it, there's the mortgage. And when I look at this, the 2018 rate study assumed a house cost of $126 million capital cost, and then a total debt service cost or mortgage cost of $180,000, $1 million, excuse me, I wish, for a total of $306 million for total project cost. And then if I look at 2020, based upon our WIFIA loan and the anticipation of signing the SRF document, hopefully at a rate right around 1.4%, the house cost now goes up because of the PCOs you're requesting to $130 million. I'll just round it up to 131. And the debt service is reduced significantly down to, or the mortgage cost down to $128 million for a total project cost of $259 million. And if I look at the difference between those two, that is a savings of $47 million anticipated in total project costs based upon the cost of money. Would you agree with that statement and that analysis?
Yes, I will trust your math, and I will agree with that analysis. Yes.
Well, and the reason I bring it up is it refers back to questions about the rate study and the potential for lowering rates to end-line users. The council is committed by previous recorded action to looking at that on an annual basis. And would you agree that it would not be prudent? I know I'm re-asking a question that may have been already answered by you, but would you agree it would not be prudent to re-examine rates until you have inked the SRF document and have that cash promised in hand?
Yeah, I believe so. I think that would be prudent. As you said, we do not have a commitment from SRF. They've led us through the first gate. They've said you're clear on the environmental, and we've got to look at all the other components of this and vet those. And the interest rates could change, but something could happen that would not allow SRF to give the city the money. So I think that's a prudent thing to do. And then I think even more important is we're in unprecedented times in terms of everything, and that will have an impact on the bidding market in terms of construction projects. And I'm hoping that for the sake of this project and Morro Bay, that it has a positive impact on the cost for the conveyance facilities. But it's a big unknown right now, and I would feel much more comfortable bidding and awarding that project as well.
And the timing for that, once again, those two components being known, and then allowing for the opportunity for council to look at pretty much what will be, I'll use the term, almost final costs associated, total costs associated with the project. When would you anticipate that being?
So the plan is to advertise the pipelines in late June with an award, a construction award in late September. So going through that bidding process. So that's the first item. The second item right now, we're looking at the first part of January, end of December, for a signed loan agreement with SRF, and things, obviously with the situation that we're in as well, that has slowed things down a bit. But we are pushing them to turn around their review as quickly as possible and to negotiate that loan agreement as soon as possible.
Great, thank you. Page 49 of the staff report, if I could refer you to that. If I look at the summary of the PCOs by category, I look at biological opinion, and you have numerous times already answered the question as to the rationale or the reason behind the delays. And you cite in the report on the first paragraph under rationale, basically that the process delayed the start of construction by nearly 5 months, which resulted in delay and escalation costs as the city projected the start date in the contract with the design build company. My point is, as a program manager for this project, is there anything in your power that you felt you could have done that could have more rapidly accomplished the decision, which was required by EPA or WIFIA to move to a higher level federal review? Is there anything you could have done in your power, or that the city could have done in its power, to have advanced the time that could have occurred?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it really, as I mentioned before, the consultation by definition is done between the EPA and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So it's the city's project, but it's WIFIA's money, and so I think there were times during this process, once we found out in early October that we were going to have to go through some type of consultation, that we went back and forth and said, well, maybe we should not do the formal consultation and go informal. There's a little bit more risk to something happening during construction and having delays during construction. But it would be faster for us to get through this process and get the loan agreement signed and be able to issue the notice to proceed for construction. But we were influencing that process. The ultimate decision was made by EPA as the lead agency. So there wasn't much that we could have done. The process, obviously the timing of the process, we went through the addendum and some additional environmental information last year, but going to Fish and Wildlife in early July, I think was the right timing. We just didn't get lucky with what they came back with in terms of a decision there.
And if I recall correctly, there was significant involvement of our congressman trying to help advocate for this and to move this along. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, good. And so if I can connect some things and ask you this question, if I look at the biological opinion total of the PCOs you're proposing, they're $3,309,000 for biological opinion. Fully 55% of the total PCOs that you are recommending in this report tonight. Is it a fair assumption to state that because we were one of 12 communities selected by WIFIA to participate in their program, which resulted in an unbelievably low interest rate for approximately 50% of the funds for the project, which translates to, as I just mentioned, about a $47 million debt service saving if you look at both the SRF and WIFIA program components. Is it a fair statement that there's a trade-off of about $3.3 million because of the WIFIA or federal EPA mandated secondary or higher review by Fish and Wildlife that actually results in significant savings to the community if we didn't have a WIFIA or EPA loan? I know that's a real long-winded question, but I'm trying to connect the dots here to show the relationship between something that, in my opinion, was out of control, not because of us or project managers, but because of federal requirements and a federal agency that actually advantaged us.
Yeah,
is that a fair or correct statement?
I think that's a correct statement, and looking at the silver lining of what is otherwise a bad position to be in. And as a program manager, never want to be in a situation where we are adding costs to the project or missing the schedule per what we have in the contract. But it was fortuitous that the delay just so happened to put us into a timing where the interest rates were very low.
Right. Fortunately, and I personally was in Washington prior to travel restrictions the first week in March, and sat in the office of the Bureau of Reclamation. And as I had related to you, and when I got back, the discussion primarily was how can the federal government improve their process for moving these kinds of issues forward more expeditiously so it doesn't result in significant cost overruns to cities like Morro Bay. I want to also just very briefly ask you, let me find where it is here, page number. Give me 1 second, I'll find it. Page number 75 of the report.
Of 205?
Apologies. Yeah, 75 of 205. Cash flow projections. Can you tell me, with regard to cash flow projections right now, how much of the money we have been reimbursed by SRF for our planning loan? And I'll ask the next question after you answer that.
Yeah, we've received about $300,000 of our $10.3 million planning loan from SRF, and we've made an ask of about $10.6 million. So they are currently, so that's where we are in the planning loan.
So what's the holdup on the process of getting reimbursed by SRF for an approved planning loan? What's the problem?
There is, number one, I'll tell you, I'm not sure what the problem is. I know that SRF is, they're pretty they're pretty upfront when they'll tell you that what their timelines are for reimbursement. But essentially, we provided them information. They came back with some questions on our second reimbursement request, which was much larger than the first, and it was I want to say it's probably about half of the $10.3 million. And they came back, and we got them a lot of supporting information pretty quickly, and they've had that information for I want to say over a month, and we have not gotten a reimbursement back from them for that second reimbursement request, and we still have the pending third reimbursement request to go after that. Now, I don't know what's taking so long. I will venture to say that the timing and what's going on right now is adding cost, or excuse me, not cost, but time. I know it's adding time to the review of our SRF application and getting to a signed loan agreement, but it's not helping. But why it's taking so long, or why the process takes so long, I don't know.
Is it would you consider it to be another example of bureaucracy in dealing with state and federal agencies to move processes forward? Sorry.
I wouldn't know another reason for it. But as I mentioned, we had made the reimbursement request. It had taken quite a while to get comments back on that reimbursement request, and then we turned around things pretty quickly after that. And we asked for a lot from some of our contractors or consultants that are working on the project, and they turned it around pretty quick. And we haven't heard anything back from them in quite a while. So,
thank you. So, page 49, and this is my second to last question. Biological opinion in your table, value $3.3 million, changing conditions $1.065 million. If I add those two together, I get 73% of the total PCOs that you're requesting. Would I be correct in assuming that 73%, or approximately $4.3 million out of $5.992 million is due to conditions outside of the control of the program manager, the city, and or staff?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, I think the changing conditions is a very easy way to look and say there was one thing that was put into the RFP for a reason. That was the data that was included in the RFP. Things are not the same now for whatever reason, and so I think that is a very easy one to point to say, the information has changed, and as such, the engineering has to change with it. And we're using a better information, more up-to-date information. It's going to result in a better design, a more robust facility for the city. And then in terms of the delays for the biological opinion, again, not necessarily something that could have been identified earlier in the process.
Okay, thank you. My last question is page 51. Right in the middle, local labor good faith effort under A. Are we specifically targeting only local city residents and businesses, or are we really targeting city and or county?
Hold on really quickly here. Let me find, oh no, did I close that? There's specific language in the city's local hire code section that I believe it's within it's the city of Morro Bay and within 5 miles of the city of Morro Bay, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't know if Mr. Livick or Mr. Newmeyer or anybody else can correct me on that, but I'm pretty sure. I just in pulling up some things as we were talking here, I inadvertently closed that section, that city code section.
I just wanted to make sure that we were using the correct definition for local, and if basically this language is correct, that's fine.
Yeah, 1 second here, and I'll cite you the local preference. Local business means a vendor or contractor who has paid its local business tax to the city of Morro Bay at least 6 months prior to bid or proposal opening date, does business in the Morro Bay community by providing goods, services, or construction, and maintains a physical business address located within 5 miles of the jurisdictional limits of the city of Morro Bay and performs business on a day-to-day basis. Post office boxes shall not be used for the purposes of establishing said physical address. So that's the definition of local from the city's code.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all the questions I have. Thank you so much, Eric, for answering these detailed questions. Very important, obviously, given the magnitude of the request for the PCOs. With that, Zeke, we'll go ahead and open up public comment. And if we have anybody in the queue, we'll go ahead. This is public comment for item C-1.
We have John Weiss.
Welcome, John.
Thank you. Takes a moment to unmute. I actually had several questions, but after listening to the council, I have a few comments. I do want to live by the comment I made in general public, which is the city is divided, and I hope we can all come together to solve problems and not feel gotcha in our vocabulary. Having said that, it sounds like a lot of excuses are being made, which disappoints me. I do have some comments that are positive and a few questions. I appreciate the low interest rate, 0.83%, and I understand from the comments that there will be a wait and see on the reduced rates as promised 2 years ago. I appreciate the local labor, and I appreciate the work of the CFAC. I am concerned about that the contingency appears to be largely being exhausted, but I think that was explained a little bit by Mr. Caceres, but I'm still concerned that the contingency will be greatly reduced for sure. I am concerned about the fact that the mayor and the council and others have stated that the project will not exceed $126 million. And here we are at 130 plus million. So that concerns me. And it feels like there are many items that will be requested in the future that will further increase our cost. My question is, given that we've had a 218 in 2007, 2015, 2018, that there will not be a fourth 218. And why are we not being held to this $126 million baseline, if you will? I'd also like to ask why Jeff Heller's project experience on the council is not more efficiently being utilized, although I know he's a liaison, but I don't know how seriously he's really being taken. See, I have 51 seconds. It sounds like the city build team is based on the Corolla quote, so I wonder why the question sounds like you should have known about the red-legged frog. And with that, I think I've kind of largely run out of time. I want to not exhaust all my time with my questions and comments. I do want to state my appreciation for all the work that has been done. I do have 2 sewer bills, and I do feel the pain of the businesses and the homeowners. And I hope that we can figure out a way to make these costs and these rates more reasonable, because they are causing businesses to go under. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Zeke, next caller.
Next caller is Betty Winholtz.
Welcome, Betty.
Thank you. I need to figure out how to get to my comments, and I can't seem to figure out how to do that. My screen, there we go. Thank you. Okay, so I did send the council some comments earlier in the day, and I think some of them have been addressed. I reinforce Mr. Weiss's statement that, you know, the good faith statements that were presented to the public in order to pass the 218 was not to exceed, and here we are. So my question becomes, what happens if you don't approve the CPOs? Or PCOs? Do they not get paid? Does the construction management guy walk away? What is the consequence of not approving these orders? Another comment is we continue to talk about the three parts of this total project, the WRF, the pipes and lift stations, and the injection wells. But what about the fourth component that the Coastal Commission put on us in terms of the demolition and the cleaning of the current plant site? That cost hasn't come up, or we haven't talked about a contract for that. So I'm wondering how that's going to be handled in this process. You've talked about the state revolving fund, so we know that that's not going to be here till the end of the year. I'll continue to back my statement that I don't think U.S. Fish and Wildlife is to blame for this. I would remind the council that they're the ones that agreed with staff to push this project in reverse. That is, to not get all the agreements from the different agencies and hold public hearings and then get the permit, but you wanted the permit first and then went after all the easements and the permission second. So to some extent, I think you still have to own part of that. I would like to know if you will take separate votes on these different pieces that are being asked of you. I don't know if you're going to agree to all the things, but I think you're being asked to approve 4 or 5 things. I'm hoping you'll take the 3 or 4 or 5 different votes separately. And my last question is, the point was made that there are increased legal costs, and could you be more specific about that? Is that strictly because of the easements, because of eminent domain, or are there other things going on about legal costs that we're not aware of? Thank you.
Thank you. Zeke, next caller.
All right. Next caller, please.
This is Dan Sedley, resident of Morro Bay. Hello?
Welcome, Dan. Can you hear us, Dan?
Yes, thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
You know, in all of the discussions that have been going on, they talk about the city's money, the city's money, the city's money. And I would just like to point out that it's not the city's money. It is the ratepayers' money that's being spent here, I think, sometimes carelessly. And the ratepayers need to be accounted to. Throughout this process for the past several years, we have been told absolutely that we're hiring the best companies in terms of project manager, in terms of Black and Veatch, that we're getting the absolute best. But now in the descriptions tonight from Mr. Caceres, it seems like we've had, well, less than standard designs that now have to be upgraded. And that's upsetting to me, to be told that we hired the best, and then to be told that, well, we didn't really get the best. So now we're spending, well, we had 16, I think, change orders to start with, and now we have 26 change orders. And frankly, it wouldn't surprise me if we had another 26 change orders costing millions and millions of dollars. I never did believe that this project would cost $126 million. However, I am upset. I am extremely upset with the mayor and the city council for absolutely promising a project for $126 million and not providing that, and then taking this so very lightly. Oh, it's just another increase. We have money to spend. I am with Ms. Winholtz that we should be considering not approving these change orders, that we seriously consider go back to the drawing board, of which was obviously so poorly planned to begin with. In regards to the red-legged frogs, anybody that actually walks out to the South Bay Boulevard site and walks out to where the construction is going on, you clearly can see a large dry creek that runs down under the highway to a wet creek. This very clearly is a habitat of the red-legged frog. It doesn't take a biologist to see that a red-legged frog couldn't travel up the dry creek, especially during the wet winter months, and make a habitat out of it. I don't know. To me, it seems like Carollo is responsible for that $2.5 million that's being charged to us because they should have planned for the red-legged frog. The major projects throughout our town.
Dan, thank you. The 3 minutes are up, sir. Your 3 minutes are up, Dan. Thank you. You bet. Zeke, next caller, please.
There's nobody else in the queue with their hands raised.
Okay. With that, I will close public comment and, turn on my video and bring it back to council.
There's one person that just raised their hand, actually.
I beg your pardon?
One person just raised their hand.
Okay, I'll allow it. Go ahead.
All right. Go ahead, caller.
Hi, it's Melanie Williams-Mahan again. I just have a few questions. What happens if we don't get fully reimbursed from the SRF? And what happens if the California version of Fish and Wildlife doesn't give us the right answers regarding the frog? And also, what happens to the frog next year when it's winter and it's back? I mean, it is dry season, so how can we really figure out if the frog is living up there or not? Another thing, are the people working now local? And if not, why not? And also too many what ifs and hopefully. I mean, this is out of control and it just started. It doesn't bode well for our bills. It doesn't bode well for anybody in the city to have to pay this. This is beyond ridiculous. Thank you.
Thank you. Zeke, any other?
No, sir, that's
callers?
all.
That'll do it. Thank you. Zeke, are we there?
Yes, sir. That's all there is in the queue with the hands.
Okay, thank you. I'll close public comment and bring it back to council. Once again, we are looking at 4 potential recommendations. I'm going to open it up for discussion and or motion. Staff recommends that the city council consider the following: review and approve all 26 potential change orders for water reclamation facility. Number 2, as recommended by CFAC, review and receive the WRF capital project report and provide direction deemed appropriate with regard to CFAC recommendation to provide the integrated Microsoft project management schedule with some key milestones for the WRF project updated frequently and shared with city staff, CFAC, and city council. And then number 3, review and approve proposed local labor provision language for the bid packages and contract agreements for the remaining components of the WRF project and provide a value to be used for liquidated damages for same. I will, prior to opening it up, try to see if, Eric, are you still there? I'm sure you are. Just want to have you comment on a couple of the questions that I jotted down from those folks that gave public comment. Let's see. With regard to the PCOs, if they're not approved, what happens?
I think that's I'd say it depends on the PCO. I think I'll go to the biological opinion or the construction delays or however you want to categorize those. One is that exclusion fencing is required by the biological opinion, and we need to provide that exclusion fence, or we would essentially default on our WIFIA loan. So I'm not saying that, and I would have to explore this with legal and other folks, but I don't necessarily know if you couldn't do the project, but you would default on your WIFIA loan, and you would not be able to get SRF funding if you don't abide by the provisions of the biological opinion. Those are written into the agreement. In terms of the delay costs, those are contractual obligations that we have with the Felance Black and Beach team. And if we did not approve those, then there are provisions in that contract for Felance Black and Beach to sever their relationship with the city. I don't know if it would go there, but it's a significant amount of money, and there's real cost associated with it in terms of impacts from escalation and manpower that's been expended on the project. So that's the other implication. A number of the other PCOs, the city council could take issue with, and we can have that discussion about the individual PCOs if there are certain ones to see how it would impact the project. But certainly they could be questioned. Some of them are absolutely necessary. Others could be somewhat discretionary. I think that they're all the PCOs that we're bringing to you are valid. They've been vetted, and they improve the project.
Thank you. Any comment? Ms. Winholz asked about more specifics on legal costs escalation due to the project. Do we have anything off the top of your head or numbers?
Yeah, I didn't want to. I don't want to overstate the legal piece, but we have added a little bit of budget in for. We already have budget in for support from the city's legal counsel for a number of things that we do, developing these staff reports for council meetings being one of them, obviously, but we are going through a pretty legal heavy process with some of the easements that we're getting. And so knowing that we're now going down that path, it seemed prudent to increase the budget slightly for the legal services for the duration of the project. And that's what I would say. There is not any other reason why we're doing that other than the fact that we're going through that eminent domain process with CPUC and with Vistra.
Thank you. And then with regard to a question about the decommissioning costs for the current plant site, could you remind us of the fact that it's not included in the existing budget, and tell us where that's headed in the future?
Yeah, so Ms. Winholz brought up a good point, which our coastal development permit requires that prior to operation of the facility, the new facility at South Bay Boulevard, our coastal development permit requires the city to submit a plan for approval on the decommissioning and demolition of that facility. So it doesn't require the city to decommission and demolish it, but it requires a plan. So it's one of the, and I just closed it as we were talking here, but it's one of the 15 or 16 provisions, special conditions, that we have in the coastal development permit, is to submit that plan before we start operating the new facility. The $126 million budget in the rate study, our current $130.5 million budget that we've got now, does not include the demolition of the water reclamation facility. The environmental document covers it. The budget does not.
Thank you for that. And let's see, is there a chance that we're not going to get reimbursed by SRF for our planning loan that has already been executed?
No, I don't believe so. Even the first, I would say that I don't have the numbers, the exact numbers off the top of my head, but almost the entire initial reimbursement request of $300,000 was paid. Of the second reimbursement request, which I'm off the top of my head, I'm saying is about $5 million. In question was a couple $100,000 of that, where they required additional backup, and we provided that information. So we're going to be able to more than exhaust the $10.3 million planning loan with eligible costs that we have for the project. So I don't think that's an issue. Actually, just going through and had a discussion with SRF today about eligible costs for the project, which is something that we deal with a lot on projects where we're doing a rehab to an existing facility or something like that, and really don't see very, very little in the way of non-reimbursable costs for SRF and or with you for the project.
Great. And do we have any idea the number of local hires presently working on the design build team portion of the project?
I don't have that information, but I can get that information for you and report that back to council. I don't recall how many of them are Morro Bay citizens or Morro Bay residents at this time.
Ask you to bring that back. And then lastly, Ms. Mahan Williams also mentioned about what about next year and frog issues. You might just let us know that whatever mitigations are in place are for the duration of the project. Is that correct?
Yeah, the exclusion fencing stays up for the duration of the project. The temporary exclusion fencing, the big orange fence that people see out there. And then depending on the time of the year, it just requires different observations that need to happen by our biologist or the biological monitors. It's more intensive during the wet season, which is, I want to say October 15th to April 15th. But still, when we're still disturbing native grasslands right now. And so we have biological monitors that are out there and are involved in monitoring where that is occurring. So it's not that we're not doing any monitoring during the non-rainy season. We still have to do monitoring. It just takes it to another level during the rainy season.
Great, and thank you for those answers to the questions that were asked. Appreciate that.
Mayor, do you mind if I make one comment on the
absolutely
issue?
Not. Go ahead.
Because the question's been brought up a few times. Why we didn't anticipate or know about the frog issue, and I just want to offer that the Cayucas project proceeding just before ours, and there's red-legged frog habitat on their project, all over that project, and the agency overseeing that project, they didn't find issue with red-legged frog. So that was the most recent project preceding ours in similar habitat. So, we saw what they went through and sort of used that as a recent example. And we're sort of surprised when we got back something that, again, in the same territory, same habitat, but we got a completely different answer or response from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So we were just bewildered by that. And I think that's because there's been a change in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife approach after the Cayucas project, not because of it, but just, coincidentally. So just wanted to offer that to make sure people knew that was sort of what we were working with.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. With that, I will bring it back to council and either entertain a motion and discussion or discussion first. And I'm going to start with one of our WRF subcommittee members, Councilmember McPherson. Would you lead us off, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'm going to make comments about each one of the issues that the staff has requested comments on, if that's all right with you.
Certainly.
Okay. All right. So first, with respect to the 26 potential change orders, it's obvious that nobody likes to see cost increases on this project. But I have to say that I was never one who said that we would never possibly go past $126 million, because you can't make that kind of a promise at the beginning of a project of this size and scope. But the PCOs have been fully vetted. The program manager has provided an adequate rationale for why they are all necessary, and they have been negotiated. And so therefore, my recommendation is that we approve the PCOs for the project as proposed by the staff. And I think we need to keep in mind that the cost increase of just the project, not the construction project, is from 126 million to 130.6 is 3.6%. So it is not a significant increase. It's due to costs largely due to events outside the city's control, both changing conditions and, of course, the major one that we've discussed at length tonight, the biological opinion, that really was a result of our receiving a federal loan to fund the project. The others are associated with safety, reliability, and long-term operation and maintenance cost savings. So they are all fully justified. And as we've pointed out tonight, the cost to construct the WRF are far outweighed by the decrease in costs associated with paying back the loans. And so we know that overall, this project is going to cost the citizens of Morro Bay less over time. There is no projected additional cost to the ratepayers at this point associated with those PCOs. In fact, we expect and hopefully will be able to reduce the monthly amount collected as soon as the final cost for all elements of the project are known. With respect to the recommendations by the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee to modify the quarterly report format, I'm inclined not to accept CFAC's recommendation. It was made on a 4-3 vote to modify the quarterly report, and these are my reasons. The council has already made a number of changes to the format as recommended by the CFAC, and I am personally comfortable with the current report format. I think it's easy to read and understand, and it helps to keep the same information in from one quarter to the next so you can make comparisons across time. And, you know, if there are some redundant tables, which I realize that was also an issue for them, I certainly wouldn't mind if we shorten the report by eliminating redundant tables. But I think any changes that require more time and work on the part of the project manager means that the project costs will go up, and I'm opposed to unnecessarily increasing project costs. You know, we are paying the project manager to manage the schedule, and his work is overseen by the city manager as well as the council. And I think his team possess the knowledge, experience, and skill set to manage this project. They've always responded appropriately to any questions that we have had and that CFAC has had. And I think we need to keep in mind that CFAC's role is to provide a high-level financial review of the project and a second pair of eyes. It's not really to micromanage the project. So I think it needs to stay focused on the big picture. And I know that Eric has expressed his willingness to provide individual members with detailed construction schedule if that's what they wish to see. So I think we can meet their needs by that method. With respect to the local labor provision language, I approve the language as written, and especially after the explanation of what local means. And I would trust the program manager to determine what the appropriate liquidated damages should be, and he's mentioned in the range of $5,000 to $10,000 per incident, and I would concur with that. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Councilmember McPherson. Appreciate that. And let's go to Councilmember Heller. Sir, please.
All righty. Thank you. I didn't say too much about the local labor issue before, but I agree with Councilmember McPherson that $5,000 to $10,000 per incident is appropriate. I also, frankly, believe this is a hard measure. It's really kind of a loophole. It's difficult to enforce or really make an impact on who's working on your project. But I urge you to do all you can to enforce it within the law. That has to do with contractor work. The question I have for you, Mr. Caceres, is you have Corolla folks, plus you have a number of sub-consultants working for you. Do you know what percentage of those folks are residents of Morro Bay? Or is there?
I just needed, yep, sorry about that. I was just trying to unmute. We have a couple of members from our project team that live in Morro Bay from some of our sub consultants or other contractors, or excuse me, contracts that are had directly with the city. So not necessarily our subcontractors, but also other contractors. So specifically, Mr. Steve Mimiaga, who is the construction manager, working as a subconsultant to Carollo, is a resident of Morro Bay, and also members of at least one member of our hydrogeologist is a resident of Morro Bay as well.
Okay, well, whatever you could do to increase that percentage would be greatly appreciated. We're paying $9 million, I think, at this point, $9 million plus to your firm to manage the project, and we need to get as many of those dollars back into the hands of the residents that we possibly can. Regarding the PCOs, I'm not really accustomed to having PCOs incorporated in the documents before owners approve them. I would hope that you don't do that in the future. We are here to meet and discuss any issue that comes up when it comes up. I hope I don't see that again. The piping project you mentioned, we've been waiting to try and find out what that true cost is going to be. Last time we met, you said the bids would be open July 1st. Tonight, you announced that they're not going to be open until the end of the summer. So I don't understand why the schedule seems to continually slip on this project, but I don't have a warm and fuzzy feeling about how it's being managed. The red-legged frog wildlife, Fish and Wildlife Service issue, my experience, having managed large projects in this county over the last 15 years, is the first consultant you call, and possibly the most challenging consultant on projects in this county, is Department of Fish and Wildlife Service. That's before you call the Coastal Commission. That's before you call the fire marshal. They are notorious for being difficult, particularly when you call them late. It's easy to blame other things on other people and prior consultants, and if this hadn't happened, that seems to be the mantra for this project, and I'm extremely concerned. I think, where does the buck stop when things continue to go wrong with the project? At what point do we say, Carollo, this is yours. You're managing the project now. I don't have a sense that that's happening right now. So that's where I stand with that. When you look at the wall that is designed to keep the frogs out, it looks to me like you really made somebody angry. I mean, have you seen the design on that wall? It's crazy. It's just quite hard to believe. Anyway, I'm opposed to approving these change orders for a number of reasons. One is they were incorporated in construction documents before they were approved by the owner. Number two is typically there's a cost benefit analysis. When I see a proposed change order and there's a cost associated with that change order, I want to know what it's going to save the ratepayers by implementing that. Or is it just something, we came up with this idea, well, why don't we do this? Design build doesn't mean you have a blank checkbook and you can just start adding things. And I'm not saying that happened here, but it feels like no one's controlling the costs. No one is fighting to keep it on budget and on schedule. Who is fighting for that? I don't have a sense that anybody is. Those are my comments. I would like to make a motion, though, if I could, Mr. Mayor.
Could you address the item of the local labor agreement, please?
I think I talked about that at the very beginning.
Okay, what about the liquidated damages amount specifically?
Yeah, I like Council members McPherson's target of $5,000 to $10,000 per incident.
Great, got that. And then could you address the CFAC requested changes to the reporting? Item number 2 on the staff report.
I don't have a sentiment one way or the other on that.
Okay.
So can I make a motion?
If you'd like to.
I'd like to move that we approve the 5 credit change orders where we actually get money back. And those numbers are, I I had them written down here. Where are they? Those are numbers 19, 42, 62, 64, and 66.
19, 42, 64, and 66?
Let's see, did I get them all? 19, 42, 62, 64, 66. They're five.
Sorry, I missed that one. Got it.
It's all right. They're five, right? Miss any, Eric?
No, that's all five of them. You got them.
Okay.
Is that the end of your motion?
It is.
Okay. Is there a second? So motion fails for lack of a second. Thank you, Councilmember Heller. I will move to, okay, go ahead. Did you have further comments?
Thank you, sir.
You bet. Thank you. I'll move to Councilmember Davis, please.
Thank you. Regarding recommendation number 1, I feel that Mr. Casares adequately answered my questions and questions by other council members with sufficient in-depth explanations. I don't like the scale of the changes, but I believe that they are necessary as they have been explained to us tonight. Regarding the CFAC recommendation, I'm comfortable with the existing format and see no reason to change that. I do approve the language for local labor provision, and I appreciate that we are proceeding with that. It's very important to me. And I trust the program manager to set the liquidated damages within the range that he recommended, $5,000 to $10,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis. We'll move to Councilmember Addis, please.
Yeah, Eric, maybe you already said this, but I think you were asked if you felt like the project was going well, and I was wondering if you could just tell me like 3 things. If you could just remind me like 3 things that you felt like were going well from the project manager perspective.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is the funding. As can be seen from tonight, obviously, we're going to continue to do everything we can to keep the budget down. But even with the budget increases, securing low interest and loan funding, or low interest loan and grant funding, is going to have a big impact on the overall cost of this to the city and ultimately the city's ratepayers. In terms of the schedule, we are behind schedule in terms of the baseline schedule that we developed back in 2018, but we still are projecting about 9 months of float between the completion of the water reclamation facility and when the time schedule order is due in February of 2023. And then another thing I think is the team. I think one of the things that we talked about here, I think we have a good working relationship with the contractor out on the site doing about $75 million worth of construction for the total project. And I think that that our relationship has been good through the design process and continues to be good during construction. I think we have a good contracting team, and then I think the strength of all the various subconsultants and other contractors and consultants that we have on the team, in terms of our biologists, our archaeologists, and all of those people are key to the project. And I think it's one of the other things that's going very well.
That's super helpful. Thank you for defining that. I'm in favor of moving forward these change orders. I had a lot of questions about them. Many of them my colleagues asked tonight at council. Some of them I spoke with our city manager about. Some of them I emailed about. And of course, nobody likes to see potential change orders come forward, and especially at this number of change orders and for this dollar amount. At the same time, I think it's incredibly important that this project move forward, and I'm glad to hear that from a from a funding perspective and from a being on time perspective that we're going in the right direction. At this time, I would not support changes to the quarterly updates simply for the reasons that were already stated. I think anything we can do to keep costs down, we've heard that over and over from the public, that the public would like costs to be kept down. And I know as ratepayers ourselves on council, none of us want to have to pay more. So I'm not in favor really of changing these quarterly updates. I am in favor of the local language component. I do feel like if there's ever a time for us to focus on local labor, now is the time, and I'm proud of our council for doing something around local labor. I was a huge proponent of doing the strongest that we possibly could for local labor, and so I was very happy to see that come back. And I agree with that recommendation between $5,000 and $10,000 for, if there's issues with making efforts towards local labor. So I very much appreciate all the work and all the questions that my council colleagues expressed. And I guess that's it for me for now before the motion.
Thank you. For myself, having been involved with this project for now 6+ years, I will say that no increase in cost is ever something that any of us want to see. However, having had the opportunity to look at the significant detail behind each of the PCOs, I am convinced, and I've given testimony and also discussed it directly when I was in Washington, D.C., regarding the issues surrounding the requirement by the EPA or WIFIA loan folks, specifically regarding the red-legged frog issue and an added layer of review that was totally unknown to staff or to the city. That was mandated by EPA at a very late date. They appreciate hearing that feedback because it has resulted in cost increases of over $3 million to the city, which are very significant. If you look at all of the proposed PCOs, fully 73% of them, I believe, are outside of the control of project management and have occurred because of conditions and or requirements imposed on us from external agencies whose timing could not be anticipated and could have affected a better outcome. Additionally, if you look at total project costs, fully the savings on the mortgage for this project are historically great. And I am hopeful that once we do get full commitment from the SRF, and sign that loan document, that one of the first things that we will do as a council is to reevaluate rates with the hopeful anticipation that the amount of rates currently being collected could be reduced significantly. I trust Carollo, I trust Mr. Casares, I trust Mr. Collins and staff. Myself and Councilmember McPherson have spent countless hours going through detailed questions on literally every aspect of the project that we try to bring to you in summary form. But because of that, I have a deep level of faith that I did not have, and I tried to bring out in my questioning with the previous project manager that was actually removed by the council. And also, I want to just remind everybody that I do believe there was a significant lack of specificity in the RFP that was written that had resulted in a number of other PCOs outside of the 73% that I cited. And because of that and the lack of involvement by Carollo, I can't place blame on them. They were not here when that was written. That was done by a previous project manager. So with that, I also agree with the majority that we should approve all of the PCOs as proposed. I do not want to change the reporting format on a quarterly basis, so I do not support the CFAC recommended changes as I believe the majority of all of our council members agree with. And lastly, I also support the language as written for the labor agreement, and also would agree with the $5,000 to $10,000 amount for liquidated damages to be determined by staff anywhere in that range as what might be appropriate. So with that summary, I will make the following. Yes.
I'm ready to make the motion. May I?
Okay.
As your fellow WRF subcommittee member.
I will stop and allow you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I move the council approve the 26 potential change orders for the WRF and keep the quarterly report format in the current one that is approved by the council, and approve the proposed local labor provision language for the bid packages and contract agreements for the remaining components of the WRF project, and set the liquidated damages between the $5,000 and $10,000 at the staff's discretion.
I will second that. And ask for any other discussion. Hearing none, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember McPherson.
Yes.
Mayor Heading.
Yes.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes.
Councilmember Heller.
No.
And that would be it. The motion carries 4-1.
I don't think I
Missed Councilmember Addis.
I'm so sorry. Councilmember Addis. I went out of order, apparently. I apologize.
That's out of order. Thank you. I'm a yes.
Motion carries 4-1.
Thank you, Dana. I appreciate that. Do you need a restroom or a biofluid break, Council?
No.
Sure.
Sure, no?
5 minutes would be great.
Hearing at least one. I have 8:43 and 30 seconds. If we could be back at in about 5 minutes, 8:48, 8:49 would be great. We will resume in 5 minutes. Thank you.